IB Nation, welcome to the big show. Just realized, Trevor, we got something very important missing from that little thing we got going on there. The Dame part of Notre Dame is gone, so we're going to go ahead and fix that here real quick. But we are here for this week's Buy, Sell, Hold, Trev. I'm excited for this week's show. Also, got some new things we're doing for some overlays and backdrops. And it's just kind of a perfect time to announce, we've been with them for a while, but, we're really diving into our new relationship that we have now with Believe. And we moved over to Believe on January 1st. They've been a great partner for us so far. Had a great meeting this past week with one of the people at Believe about just some of the things that we want to be able to do at Irish Breakdown and just, different aspects that we want to have, some different guests on IB Nation Sports Talk and some different aspects and ways that we can make this thing better. And, they're doing some cool stuff for us. If any of you ever see Believe TV on, they're having some of our shows on Believe TV. So hoping to have more of that. Just a really cool deal. Great partnership. It's early yet, but so far it's really, really been a great partnership. So we're excited to be with them. So you guys are seeing a little bit of changes. Obviously, if you're looking for our show and want to go to the main, you can always subscribe to our podcast at Apple. You can always subscribe to our podcast to Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And, of course, you can subscribe to it on the Believe channel if you type in Irish Breakdown Believe. But you don't have to necessarily go directly to that. It's all part of the deal. So we're excited about that partnership, Trevor, and just everything else that we kind of got going on right now. So I'm very much looking forward to today's show. And of course, today we are doing our Buy, Sell, Hold, which is kind of our Wednesday regular show. We had a ton of great submissions this week. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to just really getting ready to roll. 2:30 today. We're going to have Notre Dame's going to have a press conference with their two new coaches. They're only two full-time coaches. Chris Ash and Jawan Sider. Sean Stires will be there, so he'll, play some clips, I would assume, from their press conference today. Trevor will write an article about that, and then, once I listen to the press conference, I'll have some thoughts on it as well. So very busy day today, Trevor, but in my opinion, nothing's more important than what we got going on today with the Buy, Sell, Hold.
You know me, man. I love Buy, Sell, Hold.
You're always ready for Buy, Sell, Hold.
Never have to get ready. You guys know it. You guys know what it is by now. Come on now. I love Buy, Sell, Holds. Again, I'll say it every single week, but I love the submissions that you guys put in. And Bryan and I were talking before the show. We put in a lot of work to come up with different topics to make sure that everything's covered in, preseason, postseason, during the season. And we like the Buy, Sell, Holds because you guys get to dictate what the topics are. Again, quick refresher for anybody. If this is your first time listening to the show, the Buy, Sell, Hold submissions are for the premium subscribers. You see it scrolling down there at boards.irishbreakdown.com in our Champions Lounge. However, if you do want to get in a Buy, Sell, Hold submission, or if you didn't get yours in time and you are a premium message board subscriber, you can always throw in a super chat and we'll make sure that we get that answered as well. But Bryan, without further ado, man, it's time for Buy, Sell, Hold. I'm ready to jump into it. It's going to be a busy day like you alluded to, but we got first things first. We got Buy, Sell, Hold.
Yeah, man. And of course, Salty Virginia Peanuts is the guy that puts that up every day on the board. He's the one that puts it up for us. And we greatly appreciate Salty doing that for us. And so he kind of does his own submissions now. And that's kind of how we're going to start things off. So we're going to start off with our guy Salty, kicking it off with this week's Buy, Sell, Hold.
Buy, Sell, Hold. The flip from a silent commitment of Samote Kotoanga from Notre Dame to USC was unexpected and very disappointing. It suggests that a number of recruits have built a strong bond with Chad Bowden and that this may induce others to also favor USC.
Well, a number of recruits, meaning like more than one? Sure. I mean, look, we told you guys this when he left, and I know that some people wanted to convince themselves that, Chad Bowden wasn't that good at what he did, and it wasn't a big loss and all this kind of stuff. And what you and I said, Trevor, is it's okay to say Chad did a great job. Losing him is a loss. But Notre Dame will be okay if they make the right hire, and they'll be fine. And that's what that those are both true. But there's no question that Chad Bowden did a phenomenal job. Part of the lull you're seeing right now with Notre Dame's recruiting is because he did so much of the recruiting that now coaches are kind of having to step up and carry a little bit of it, on top of the fact that it was a dead period, which means no visits. You couldn't go anywhere, no one could come see you. So is that going to be true? Yeah, that's going to be true. There's going to be a couple guys that Notre Dame was in a great position with that are going to look at USC and potentially go to USC on top of Samote Katoanga. Trent Mosley is definitely trending in that direction as well, which is obviously an unfortunate thing, but that's the nature of when you have personnel changes. The question is, I buy that. I don't think it's going to be a massive number of kids. Like, I don't think like half of Notre Dame's class is now going to end up at USC of what was going to be Notre Dame's class, because some of that newness will fade a little bit. Once the dead period gets over and the Notre Dame staff can get out there, they can get kids on campus for visits, they'll climb back up and they'll be okay, in my opinion, especially once they finally make a hire for the recruiting, basically the recruiting coordinator job. That'd be nice to be able to get that done and get that rolling. And hopefully they can have that done before the dead period ends, so that guy can kind of be in position to get ready to rock and roll. But I have a lot of faith in the Notre Dame coaches. I have a lot of faith in still Marcus Freeman as a recruiter. I have a lot of faith in guys like, Caleb Davis and Carter Allman, that they're going to be able to kind of recover from this and get them back on track. But sure, when a guy like Chad Bowden goes to a place like USC and he's the primary recruiter for a lot of these guys, this is going to happen. And they're also, let's be honest too, they're throwing some crazy money at kids, like overpaying for certain guys. And people have asked me, well, why can't Notre Dame do that? And I'm like, look, it's still a business. And I use this analogy, Trev, on the message board. If you're, just because you're a millionaire doesn't mean you have to spend money just to spend money. So even if you're a millionaire and you're making $1 million a year, and there's two steakhouses next door to each other, they buy from the exact same ranch, they use the exact same seasonings, the exact same amount. The chefs are from the same, studied under the same major. They cook on the same equipment. The ambiance is basically the same. Everything is identical. The taste of the steaks, everything's the same, but one costs $100 and one costs $25. Why would you pay for $100 steak? That doesn't make any sense. So if USC's overpaying for a guy at a position, and you can go get someone of equal value like a Mikhail Blade or somebody along those lines, but you don't have to overpay for him, why would you get bent out of shape or feel the need to get into a bidding war with that school? Let them blow all of their NIL money on players that are good players, but not the elite of the elite, or that they just can't pay for the volume of players. I mean, that would be my concern. And then Notre Dame's got to figure out, they got to continue to work the game with NIL. But the package that I believe he got was wild. And much as I like the kid as a player, my stance, Trev, I'm not investing that kind of money in a high school player unless he's as close to a sure thing as you can. It's just a bad investment. And that's how you have to look at NIL. You just don't have all this money to just throw around willy-nilly. You have to be smart with your money. And Notre Dame is no different.
Yeah, I agree. The only other thing that I have to add too is I've told this to a handful of people as well that were disappointed with the decommitment, as am I. Samote would have came in and made an impact on Notre Dame's defensive line, and he was a top prospect, and it hurts. I'm not going to lie. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it's no big deal. But also, we have to remember that we are talking about high school kids. They're making, up to this point, arguably the biggest decision of their lives. Not only was Chad Bowden probably a factor in this because they had a prior relationship, kid goes to high school an hour away from USC's campus. That is a factor. Now, I'm not saying that, Notre Dame's handicap is they're clear across the country and they have to be in the cold. I'm not saying that at all. But to pretend that that's not a factor, I think is a little bit unrealistic. I mean, you're getting, to all of Brian's points, you're getting a bag thrown at you. Your family is now going to be readily available to you at any point in time. And now you're going somewhere away that's an hour away from your campus. And so I think all of those factors play into it, Chad Bowden being one of them. But to Brian's point, I don't think now you're just going to start seeing half of Notre Dame's 2026 class leave because Chad Bowden is no longer at Notre Dame. Buy, sell, hold from BK's last brain cell. Great house is more than capable of having a similar impact as Luther Burden if given the opportunity.
I would say they're different players, types of players, but I do think that the impact could be similar, especially if you kind of go back and look at what Luther Burden did last season. And I would say that if Jaden Greathouse, I don't see Jaden Greathouse going out this season and catching 86 passes for 1,200 yards. I could definitely see Jaden Greathouse catching the 61 passes that Luther Burden caught this year. I could definitely see Jaden Greathouse being around the 9 catches that Luther Burden had last year in 2023 when he went for 86 for 12. What I see Jaden Greathouse's impact statistically being more along the lines of the 61 catches I'm on board with. But the yardage would not be quite what Luther Burden's was the year before because he would be more at the catches number. But could he be in a situation where he has the similar number of what catches Luther Burden had this year of 61, but those catches are more in line with Luther Burden's 14.09 yards per catch last year, which would get Jaden to about 859 yards? I could absolutely see that. I could absolutely see Jaden Greathouse, if given enough targets, being at 61 catches for 859 yards in 13, 14, or 15 games. Like, I could certainly see that, Trev. There's no question. So I buy that. He would do it differently than Luther Burden because they are different types of players, but Luther Burden is a guy that's more comfortable in the slot. I think Jaden Greathouse is a guy that so far has been very good in the slot. They played him outside as a freshman. He didn't look comfortable there. And part of that's because he didn't train for it. I think Jaden Greathouse can certainly still do things, Trev, in outside. I think he could play outside if that's what he spent the whole offseason preparing for. But I do think so far his body type, his skill set, how the Notre Dame offense works, I still believe he's best in the slot. But as with anything, I'd love to see him move around. But yeah, there's a lot of ways where I see how Luther Burden impacted the game compared to how Jaden Greathouse impacted the game, looking more so at the 23 season than what we saw this past year. And if you look at the numbers, the overall numbers, Trev, Luther Burden, I'm trying to pull this up here, what his overall completion percentage was. Give me a second. I'm going to find this real fast. But, we talked about Jaden Greathouse and how impactful he was for Notre Dame, from a target standpoint, where he was this past season over 70%. Yeah. And let's go to receiving. So Jaden Greathouse this year was targeted. He was targeted 53 times, caught 42 passes, 79.2 completion percentage, and averaged 14.2 yards per catch, or 14.1 yards per catch. That's pretty good. Yeah. And so if he gets targeted more, I don't see his completion percentage going way down. I think it'll be a little bit down. But the interesting thing about Jaden Greathouse's production, Trev, is he was kind of that way on every level of the field. It wasn't just like he was just exceptional in the short game. If you look at him this past season, and I'm going to pull up his production on the different levels of the field, that's what to me makes him so impactful. Is he's not just a worked a short part of the field guy, and that's where a lot of his production comes from. Yeah. This past season, if you look at Pro Football Focus numbers, he caught 7 of 9 targets on throws that went beyond 20 yards. And he had 1 drop, the drop against Northern Illinois. And he had 3 touchdowns. And he was 5 of 12 from 10 to 19. And if you go back and break down the film, that had a lot more to do with the quarterback than it did him. And then he was at 90.9% on short to intermediate. And then he was 10 to 10 on behind the line. But 32 of his targets were less than 10 yards, but 21 of his targets were beyond 10 yards. That's a pretty good balance. And then if you look at Luther Burden, for example, 6, 7, if you look at his 23 numbers, 71 of his targets were less than 10 yards, and then 49 of his targets were beyond 10. That's a similar breakdown. But he was 12 of 23 on deep targets, and he was 14 of 26 on intermediate. So that was the zone where he was better than Jaden Greathouse. But Jaden Greathouse's completion percentage and every other zone of the field was significantly better than what Luther Burden's was in 2023, with the exception of volume. But because Jaden went 7 of 9 on deep throws, Luther had over twice as many targets Now, the more you get targeted deep, your percentage is going to drop. But if Jaden got targeted 14 more times, he'd have to only catch 5 balls to be right at where Luther was. So I certainly think that those opportunities are there. I don't think Jaden is quite the burner, like doesn't have quite this. I should say burner, because I don't know that I'd call Luther Burden a burner. I don't think he's quite as fast as him, but I think there's other things that he does better than Luther Burden. Knowing how to get open. I think he's a little bit stronger than Luther was. So overall, I could see that. I just don't see the volume coming. I don't see him being targeted over 100 times. I don't see him being, targeted. You're looking at the receiving numbers from 2023. He was targeted 120 times, caught 71.7% of his targets. I see Jaden being around 74, 75, just the nature of how he's in the offense. And then I'd see his targets being closer to 90 than I do 120 is just kind of how I see it. But could that 90% around 75%, that gets him around 67.5 catches. That's certainly possible. And when I say 90, I think that's the ceiling of targets, just because they're going to run the ball the way that they're going to run the ball. And then also you've got other weapons where Luther Burden was the number 1 for Missouri. I think Malachi Fields is going to be more than number 1, not because, Jaden's not better or whatever, but it's the Mike Denbrock offense. That boundary position has primarily been the number 1 target in that offense. And that's more where in the Missouri offense, that slot was the primary go-to guy in that offense the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. I agree. I buy it. It's just the comp is tough. I buy that he's more than capable, but it's just Luther Burden was the go-to guy in that offense. And I think that Notre Dame spreads the ball out a little bit more evenly once you factor in the addition of Malachi Fields. Will Pauling's coming in. I believe that the tight ends are going to have greater impact next season. So statistically, maybe there's some areas where I think it could be comparable. Touchdowns, I think, could be very comparable. I mean, he wasn't that far off from it this season. Now, mind you, I think Luther Burden played maybe 12 games this past season.
Yeah, right. Well, he only had 5 or 6 touchdowns this year. His 9 came last year when he was at Missouri, when he was targeted a lot more in 13 games. He had, I think, only 5 or 6 touchdowns this year, just for the record.
Yeah. Yep.
From what I said earlier. Yeah, he had 6 this year in 12 games.
Okay. Yeah, that's not bad. I mean, Jaden, I think, had 4 this season across 16 games. So ratio-wise, I could see it being somewhat on par. I think Jaden might end up with a couple more touchdowns than what Luther Burden would have had, but I buy the fact that he's definitely more than capable of having that impact.
Did you see they only threw 14 touchdown passes this year? I know their offense struggled. I didn't realize that they only threw 14 touchdown passes this year. Brady Cook threw 11 and Drew Pine threw 3. They threw 23 the year before. That's wild. I didn't realize it was that bad. I didn't know the struggles were that bad.
Oof.
Whew, yeah, that's rough. But moral of the story, Trev, Jaden Greathouse is capable of being a number 1.
Mm-hmm.
No question.
Buy, sell, hold. Kenny Minchey comes out of spring slightly ahead or tied with Steve Angeli in the lead for the starting quarterback job.
I'll buy that he's capable of that. Is that fair? I still think CJ Carr is the guy that's going to come out of the spring in number 1, and that'll lead to his second part. But I will not be shocked if Kenny Minchey is slightly ahead in that number 1 spot. Won't be shocked at all. I think all 3 of these kids are talented kids. I think Kenny and CJ are both high-level throwers of the football from a talent standpoint. So, no, I've said before, I've made my statement clear on who I think the best quarterback is. It's not a rooting interest. It's an evaluation. But there's a lot of years where Kenny Minchey would be like, oh, God, I cannot wait to see Kenny Minchey play for Notre Dame. And that hasn't changed. So would I be shocked if Kenny comes out of the spring either tied or slightly ahead? It's possible. And then, but I don't. The reason I'm selling this this first one is because not only do I think CJ will be number 1, but more so I don't see any scenario in which CJ is number 3 coming out of spring.
Mm-hmm.
Like if CJ is number 3 coming out of spring, I think that's more about the coaches not allowing him to climb up the depth chart more than him not playing to that level. It'll be because they just leave him on the 3rd team all spring, and every time he has a better performance than the first 2, it's like, well, he did against the 3s. Like that would be the only reason that I could see CJ Carr not being 3rd.
Buy, sell, hold. Minchie and CJ Carr will be the obvious quarterback battle 2 weeks into fall camp, fighting for the starting job.
Now that I buy. Again, I don't want to dismiss Steve Angeli from this competition, but that I can buy. I just don't see a scenario where if CJ Carr's 3rd coming out of spring practice, that he's then right there with number 1 through 2 weeks of fall camp. I don't see that as being the case. So I will buy that one. I'm going to sell the first one. I can see that. It's not a given that it'll happen. Again, I'm not writing off Steve Angeli yet, but I can definitely look at the last one. And by the way, so Drew Pine was only the starting quarterback at Missouri for like 1 or 2 games this season. Brady Cook still played 12 games this year. So his number drop is not because of Drew Pine. Just so we're clear.
Yeah, with this one, bro, I'm selling the first one. I'm buying the second one. I don't see a world where CJ Carr just isn't involved in the quarterback competition coming out of spring. I just don't.
Yeah.
Buy, sell, hold from ND Joe 123. Benjamin Morrison's injury finally caught up with Notre Dame and may have cost them a national championship on Ohio State's first touchdown, where there was a broken coverage and Smith was wide open for a touchdown. And on that long pass play on 3rd and 11, if Morrison's playing, it's very likely neither one of those plays are made.
Well, I mean, no, I don't agree with that. And the reason I don't agree with that, Trevor, is because I don't see like Christian Gray still would have been covering Jeremiah Smith on that play. And that was a field throw. Christian Gray was your field corner. I know we love Leonard Moore, but it's highly unlikely that Leonard Moore's starting if Benjamin Morrison's playing. So no, I don't agree with that. Now, the first touchdown. I'm going to sell this. It's like I'm torn on this one, Trevor, and here's why I'm torn on it, because it's not so much that Benjamin Morrison wasn't a special quarterback, because he was. We've talked about this before. I mean, there's this notion that Notre Dame's going to be fine without him, that kind of thing. I don't think that's the case. And on the first touchdown, guys, that was just an incredibly well designed play. They had a tendency that they showed on film. Christian Gray read the tendency and just overplayed it. But again, that would not have been – Benjamin Morrison would have been on the opposite side of the field if that play would have happened. We don't know that Leonard Moore wouldn't have fallen for that as well. We don't know that Benjamin would have fallen that for well. It's just, it's like I feel like this is kind of like, well, Christian Gray is a pretty darn good football player for Notre Dame this year. He had a couple bad games and a player here, a play there. He's a very good football player this year. And I don't believe that Leonard Moore would have been in the starting lineup if Benjamin Morrison doesn't get hurt. I don't. My big beef with Christian Gray is, man, you gotta get them pants down a little bit, man. He's got them things up. They look like a girdle. It's like, bro, we gotta get them pants down a little bit. Come on now. But in all seriousness, so I'm gonna sell this one. I think this is selling the players short that got them there. They played 10 games without Benjamin Morrison, including 3 playoff games. They got beat by a team that had the best receiving core in college football. That just, they didn't play well enough. Simple as that. Would Benjamin Morrison would have made a difference? Maybe, but it's impossible for me to say. And I feel like buying it, and the submission is totally fair. I mean, it's totally fair. It's like you put one of the best cornerbacks in college football on your team. You think you might have a better shot to hold up to that team, and I think they would have, but I don't know that those plays still don't happen. I don't.
Look, I'll say this. If the game happened exactly the way that it did, and you put Ben Morrison in for those 2 plays, could it have made a difference? Maybe. But I think if Ben Morrison plays the whole game, I don't know if the score is 31-7 at one point. The first touchdown was just a genius play call. That was Chip Kelly going against his own tendency. Ben Morrison playing doesn't make the game plan not great. Ben Morrison playing doesn't mean that Quinshon Judkins doesn't go for a 70-yard run. Ben Morrison playing doesn't mean that Al Golden isn't going to have the defensive line slant to the boundary side on a long third down that allows Will Howard to rush and pick up the first down by like 14 yards. Look, I get it. I understand the submission from high level macro view, as I said during the season. Yes, if you put in what I believe to be the best cover corner in the country, on paper, does it make sense that he shuts down Jeremiah Smith? Maybe, because he did it to Marvin Harrison Jr. But I would make the argument that Jeremiah Smith didn't eat them up that game. It's not like the reason why Notre Dame lost is because Jeremiah Smith had 9 catches for $150 and 2 touchdowns. So if it were something like that, sure. But I think players were put in bad spots. I do.
Again, Benjamin Morrison would not have been matched up on Jeremiah Smith on that last play. Ohio State did a nice job of getting Jeremiah Smith away from Leonard Moore. Mm-hmm. They would have done the same thing if it was Benjamin Morrison on the other side of the field, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Biso hold from Ballpeen Shillelagh. The coaching staff actually has the foresight to move Preston Zinter from linebacker and does so before spring camp.
I'm going to hope by this one, Trevor. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hope by this one. It's possible. I mean, look, this staff has not been unafraid to move players. It's just, it comes to, and honestly, if they don't move Preston Zinter to tight end, Trevor, I don't think it's because Notre Dame doesn't have the foresight to do so. I think it's because they just make an evaluation that he doesn't really help them, or that he doesn't move to that room and all of a sudden he's a player, and he's going to be number 2 or number 3 on the depth chart if you move him over. They may not view it that way. They may say, hey, listen, he doesn't provide a whole lot different than what Jack Larson gives us or Ty Washington gives. They may make that evaluation and determination, which we can agree or disagree with however we feel about it, but it doesn't necessarily mean they lack foresight. It just means they made an evaluation and they felt like, why are we going to move Preston Zinter to scout team from scout team defense to scout team offense? That doesn't really help that kid out at all. I'd still do it because I think he can help you down the road at some point in time, but that they may just say, hey, look, we still like him on defense. That could be it too. So I don't think it's about a lack of foresight. I think it'd be more about just they make an evaluation that some of us may agree with and some of us may not agree with.
Sure.
But so I'm going to hope by this one.
I'm with you. I'll hope by it too. He's too talented to not be on the field in 2025. I'll say that. Biso hold. Recently, the tight end room is the least talked about room on Notre Dame's roster outside of special teams.
Oh, I don't agree with that. I'll sell that. I think we talk. I can only go by with what we talk about. I don't know what anybody else talks about. I think we talk about the tight end room plenty. I mean, Trev, every week at the end of the regular season, we kept saying, like, is this the week the tight ends finally break out? And how impactful that could be. You have an Eli Raridan piece coming out here. Actually, I'll probably just go publish it while we're talking because it's going to come out later today. It's about him being a breakout player for Notre Dame this year. So I don't agree with that. And I know we talked about the tight end room quite a bit the other day as well and what Eli Raridan could bring to the table. And we talked about Ty Washington. And so, no, I'm going to sell that. I'm going to sell that. I will say this. I don't think the tight end room gets the emphasis. And I think maybe this is why there's a perception that it gets talked about the least, because it doesn't dominate the conversation like it used to, especially like when Michael Mayer was here. But so perhaps that can kind of come across as like, we just don't talk about that room that much because we're so used to talking about it so much in the past. So I'd say that I would say that I could buy, but just as is, I would say no. I don't buy that. I mean, if anything, I'd say the position that we talk the least about this offseason has been running back.
Yep.
Because it's just kind of assumed that it's going to be really good. We don't talk about cornerback a whole lot because it's just assumed that it's going to be good. I think we've talked about tight end decent amount.
I talk about tight end once a show. I've already talked about Eli Raridon today.
You do love talking about tight ends.
I do, man. Tight ends are key to success. So I talk about tight ends once a show. So I'm selling that based on my perspective. But I understand if we're talking about in comparison, like relative to years past, then sure. I get that. Buy, sell, hold. It's more fun to watch MACtion than the NFL.
It's a buy for me. I don't enjoy the NFL. I mean, I watched some of the Super Bowl, Trevor, and I was like, this is just a boring game. You know, it's just a boring game. I don't. It's like watching the NBA. I stopped watching the NBA in the last few years. Like for a long time, I didn't watch the NBA as much, just because NBA season was just always thinking about other things. I'd always watch the playoffs, especially if the Celtics were in it. I would watch it if the Celtics were in it, and I still remember when the Celtics were playing the Lakers in the NBA Finals one year, and we were doing this. One of the classes I had to take when I was in seminary was you had to take an urban ministry class or a rural ministry class. And I was like, bro, I'm from Norfolk, Virginia. So I think I kind of got that urban ministry thing down pat a little bit. You know what I mean? I was like, I don't know about farming and stuff like that. So let me do the rural ministry. And I remember watching some of I'm trying to remember I don't know if that was the year. I think that was the year that the Celtics lost to the Lakers. So I think it was the year after the Celtics won the title, I believe. But I remember watching one of the games when we were down there and enjoying that. So I think it was it would have been 2009. So it would have been the Celtics won it in 2008, right? And then they lost to the Lakers the next year, right? Isn't that how it went down? So I think it was a series they lost, but I could be wrong on that. I'm actually looking that up now. No, the Lakers beat so it would have been the year before. It would have been the year the Celtics won the title. So, but anyway, that's kind of where I'm at, Trev. But what I was saying, the point I was making before I went down that road is I was just looking at stats last night, and I still look at box scores and stuff. And I saw the box score for the Celtics game last night against the Raptors. And then there was another game that I saw. I was like, wow, that looked like a crazy scoring game. But I'm watching the game last night, and the Celtics beat the Raptors 111-101. And the two key teams combined to shoot 84 three-pointers. And then I looked at another game last night, and it was like 150 something to 151 to 148 Grizzlies Suns in one overtime. And I looked at it, and those two teams combined to shoot 85 three-pointers and shot 56 free throws. How the heck are you shooting that many free throws when the entire game is played at the three-point line? And it's like that. I could just tell you how that game went. Just tell you exactly how that game went. I know how that game went because that's the type of game that maybe is like, okay, I'm just sick of watching basketball. And it's just not a fun game anymore. And that's how I feel about the NFL. I just don't enjoy the NFL product. I don't. It's not physical like it used to be. The rules have changed to where it's kind of boring. I remember I was just watching some of the highlights of penalties they would call on Pat Mahomes against Pat Mahomes. Like, well, and just like this game is so soft. And it's just the style of game is just not fun anymore for me. It just really isn't. And so I would much rather watch MAC football than the NFL. I watched more MAC football this year than the NFL. So that's kind of where I'm at. I just don't enjoy the pro game. I don't.
I'm on the other side. I'm gonna sell it. I still watch the NFL every Sunday. One, it also helps that Lauren's a Bengals fan, and I still thoroughly enjoy watching Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase do what they did to defenses this season, and just call it a name bias, I guess, if you want. But I'd rather watch a Bengals Steelers game than a Northern Illinois Western Michigan game, if I'm just being 100% honest. That's just it comes down to preference. So I understand why everybody feels the way that they do about the NFL. I'm not trying to stake a claim that the product is better than the MAC. For me personally, I just watch more NFL. So.
I'd be willing to bet you a lot of money, Trevor, that a lot of the people in the chat agreeing with me are closer to my age than your age. And that's like something that you and I have talked about before in some of our private conversations is, the perspective of what you're used to can really influence how you feel about what you're seeing now. You're 27 years old. What you see on the NFL now is doesn't look a whole lot different than what you grew up on. It's always looked like that. Well, I'm 46. And so what I grew up on and what I fell in love with about the NFL is way different than what it is now. So I think it's like the same with basketball. If you're 19, 20 years old, this is the only basketball you really know. This is what you grew up on. That's not what I grew up on. And so that's why I think that can factor into it as well. So it's completely understandable. And look, there's people my age who love the NFL still. I just don't. And just professional sports in general. Trevor, I can't tell you the last time I watched a World Series. Dude, you would not have, when I was a kid, there was nothing you could have done to make me and my dad miss the World Series games. And it didn't matter. I mean, the Reds, in my lifetime, in my lifetime, I think the Cincinnati Reds have played in the World Series once in my lifetime. That was 1990, because I was born right after the Big Red Machine. And so they won the title in 75 and 76, and then didn't make the World Series again until 90 and haven't been back since. So I only watched the Reds play in one World Series, still watched them all. I still remember watching, the Braves Twins World Series. I remember watching the Blue Jays World Series. I remember watching the 86 Mets. The Reds weren't even in it. The Reds got, I think that year the Reds, there was one of those years the Reds got eliminated by the Mets in one of those years. So it's just kind of like, man, now I couldn't tell you more than two guys on the Reds, and that's just because I see them on Twitter. I mean, Trev, as a married man in my 30s, I'd be tracking statistics of their top 30 minor league prospects. I mean, dude, I would look daily, every night. Part of my pre-bed routine was to go look at the scores of the minor league games so I could see how top prospects are doing. And that's how much I loved baseball. Now I could not care less about Major League Baseball. And every time I hear a new rule change, it's like, okay, just another reason why I don't like. And a lot of it was kind of like what I saw in the NBA. You went away from what baseball was to me, and it just became you either walk, strike out, or hit a home run. That's what basically, I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but that's what baseball became. It's like boring. I don't need pitch clocks. I still, the life of me, don't understand why people love a product but want to make the product shorter. To me, this notion of making games shorter is like going to Burger King and saying, man, I love your Whoppers, but can you make them smaller, please? This is too much burger for me. Or man, these steaks are really good, but could you please give me a smaller one? Charging me the same price, but can you make it smaller, please? What the heck is that all about? So that's how I view it. Just because your attention, we have ruined sports because our attention spans suck. How about we fix our attention spans? I know that's a little nuts, but it's just like a lot of this, man. It's like, I don't need pitch clocks. I miss the days where you'd have that battle of, that's baseball to me, when it's the runner and the pitcher are kind of having that battle of throwing over to first, and then eventually, you pitch out, he goes, and then are you going to get him? And that's baseball to me. Bunting and hitting and running is like, Joey Votto used to drive me nuts. Tremendous hitter, great eye, but it'd be bottom of the 8th inning, runner on second, Reds are down 1, and you could intentionally walk him without intentionally walking him. If you just do 4 straight pitches 2 inches off the plate, he would never swing at it. I grew up in an era where Barry Larkin, you try to do that to Barry Larkin, he's smacking that sucker to right center field and driving in the run, because he cared more about driving in the run. Or if there was 0 outs or 1 out, he cared about moving the runner over so somebody else could drive him in, where Joey Votto's like, I'm not going to swing at a pitch that I can't drive, so I'm going to walk. Oh, great. You just allowed them to take the bat out of your best player with the game on the line. Smart strategy. And it's just, that's not Joey Votto's fault. That's how the game was evolving. And I don't like that, and other people love it. That's fine. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm just telling you why I don't. And but a lot of it's Trevor's just like, what'd you grow up on? What'd you grow up watching? And that's really what it boils down to for me.
The one thing that I've noticed about the NFL and college, I think there's definitely some truth to the age distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of people, it just comes down to which have you always liked better, college or NFL? Because I know people my age that they're more NFL than they are college, and it's just because like a lot of the argument is NFL is easier to follow. There's less teams. You don't have kids graduating every, basically rotating teams now, essentially, and like you do in college. And so I think a lot of it just has to come down to preference, age factoring into that as well. But I know a lot of people that are my age that just don't even try to sniff college football, when I can point to a lot of examples as to why I think the product on the field is significantly better. Significantly. Better. And it's just not, but they're still, but like the games, the Super Bowl, look at how many people watch the Super Bowl. It's like, I mean, yeah, sure. But you're not going to argue with me that the product on the field is better. You're not going to tell me that the Super Bowl this past season was better than the national championship game this year.
It used to be.
It just wasn't.
Yeah, it used to be. The NFL game used to just was so much better than the college game. So much better. But it hasn't been in a few years. It really hasn't. I agree with you completely. I was both. I mean, but I was more of a Broncos fan than I was a Notre Dame fan as a little kid. I was that way too because my dad was more of an NFL fan. When my dad's case, he grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. What college football was he watching in Norfolk, Virginia? That's how he became a Notre Dame fan, is because he would actually watch the Notre Dame replays, the Lindsey Nelson, Notre Dame replays on Sunday mornings. That's the only college football he ever watched. But for him, NFL was it, because there just wasn't college football where he was from. And, so that's kind of, that's just kind of how it is. But like, I just think the product isn't nearly as good. I don't enjoy it. And it's my opinion. Other people can have a difference of opinion. And you know what I love about this country is you're allowed to have that opinion. I just, and look, and I'm clearly in the minority because the NFL is growing in popularity every single year. So clearly what they're doing is working. And I don't know that I think that it's working for the other sports, who I think are propped up by arbitrary, TV deals that I don't think necessarily reflect what those leagues are truly generating in interest, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with MLB. Did you see that ESPN and MLB have decided to part ways? ESPN's not going to, they wanted to pay him less money. Very curious to see how that goes. Yeah. They announced that 3-4 days ago. So this is the last year of ESPN and Major League Baseball partner together. Now I would assume that they're may revisit conversations down the road, but the MLB's taking a chance, because if they don't have a market out there, they're going to come crawling back to ESPN, and they're going to find that deal's going to be even less than the one they walked away from. But I would imagine one of those other networks is going to want to pay them. I still know who. So we'll see. We'll see.
I think there was one more on that page.
Yep. Yeah, there was. I didn't mean to click over on that.
Buy, sell, hold. Speaking of the MAC, the lesser FBS conferences, i.e. the Mountain West, the Sun Belt, the new Pac-12, etc., have a good chance of being left out of the future of the college football playoffs unless they figure out an alternative route. Or just the future of FBS, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think there's a split's going to happen at some point in time. And I don't know that there's anything that those schools can do about it. I think the only thing is there are some individual schools who may find themselves like kind of, what do they have in soccer? It's relegation, right? I think I could see like a Boise State, a team that's, pretty good or from a decent market being brought up like SMU was to the ACC. I could see a couple of those teams being poached into this. Memphis maybe, kind of being brought into this. But then overall, just the FBS kind of having a, it's like where it's Division 1, it's like the FBS, and then there's whatever G5 is, and then there's the FCS, and going that way.
Yeah. Agreed. Yep. I'll buy that.
Somebody said, Brian, you brought up Barry Larkin. Did you know his brother Mike was a Notre Dame football captain in 1985? I did know that, which is why it still kind of hurt my heart that Barry Larkin went to Michigan, because because his brother went to Notre Dame. Yeah. That's a very athletic family. But yes, I was aware of that. But Great. It's funny, like growing up as a kid, I think I've said this before, but my favorite players were whoever was playing shortstop for the Reds. So like when I was a real little kid, I think my first T-ball number was 13 because I was a big Davey Concepcion fan. And that was kind of at the end of the big red machine era, the mid to late 80s. I think Pete Rose had already gone to the Phillies and Expos and come back when I was watching, baseball. Tony Perez, those guys were all getting older. Johnny Bench was getting ready to retire, but like Dave Concepcion that was my guy. And then when he kind of retired and then Barry Larkin replaced him, then he became my favorite player. And then I had like my favorite Reds player, and then my favorite overall player was Ken Griffey Jr. because, his dad played for the Reds, part of the Big Red Machine. And he was fun to watch. And then when he got traded to the Reds, I was just like, I was on cloud nine for a while. Did I ever tell you what happened the day after we got married, Trev? I know some people in the chat have told this. So Ange and I got married on April 5th of 2008. And we had our wedding up in Lime, Ohio at the church I grew up in, and the church where I was actually a youth pastor for a little bit. And my grandma went to. It's where her funeral was recently. And then we had our reception at the old barn out back. And then that night, limo came and picked us up and drove us down to Cincinnati. And actually took us back to the hotel. Then we packed our car, and then we drove down to Cincinnati. So the limo didn't take us down there. But we left a plane, heading down to Cincinnati, and got a hotel down there. And then that next afternoon, we get up, and the Reds are playing the Phillies. And we're a little late getting there. And as soon as I walk in, we actually, and I don't remember how, but we normally walk in the first base side, but this time we walked in the third base side, or left field side. And we get there, and the Reds are batting. So then the bottom of the first, and I was like, hold on a second, babe. We're not going to go find our seats yet. Griffey's hitting. Second pitch he saw, I think it was the second pitch he saw, he went yard.
Let's go.
And I told him that. I said, hey, listen, I want you to know you gave me my favorite wedding gift. He goes, what? I said, yeah, you gave me my favorite wedding gift. And I told him the story because he was one of the nicest, I've said this, nicest celebrities I've ever met. I sat there and talked to him for like a half an hour at the Under Armour All-American game when his son Trey was there. I was covering the game. Super nice guy. And, but yeah, I told him about that. So Ken Griffey Jr. knows he gave me my favorite wedding gift, which was a home run against the Phillies. So that was pretty awesome. You can go look it up. It was April 6, 2008. That was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. Pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But that's how much I love baseball, man. Like at our wedding, you can see after the reception, we had on matching Cincinnati Reds jerseys with Driscoll on the back, number 4, number 5. Like huge Reds fan. Now I don't care just because I think the game sucks. And as a Reds fan, it got frustrating because you'd follow all these minor league players and then they'd finally get a chance to get up there. And if they were any good, they'd end up getting traded, or they'd go somewhere else as a free agents. And it just got real frustrating. It's just like, whatever. Stop caring. It sucks. But yeah, you always talk about you never want to meet your heroes. That's one instance where I'm glad I did. Because cool. You realize that he was like there was one point where he was over in the parent section and the security team came over there like, hey, Mr. Griffey, we've got a spot over here for you and your wife. And he's like, I thought this is where the parents sat. They're like, no, yes, sir, it is. Like he was confused and he goes, yes, sir, it is. And but we've got a spot reserved for you. He goes, looks around, he goes like, we're good. Just because he wasn't Ken Griffey Jr., the Hall of Fame player. He was like, I'm Trey Griffey's dad. And this is where the parents sit. And it was the coolest thing ever, man. But yeah, he was a super nice guy. And he had like this, because he does photography. It's like this giant camera. It's pretty sweet. But yeah, he was a really nice guy. Like genuinely cool. Good guy. Yeah. Yeah. He was. So that was pretty cool.
Buy, sell, hold from I Am Tenzin. Notre Dame will have multiple players rated 90 plus on NCAA 26.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jeremiah Love for sure. The second one, that might be a little bit of a question mark, but my thought is between Leonard Moore, a Don Schuler, somebody on defense, maybe one of the offensive linemen, maybe a Will Wagner based on what Pro Football Focus said about him coming back. I think you'll have a second guy rated 90 or above. At least two guys. At least two guys would be rated ahead. Yes, no question.
Wouldn't be surprised either way. I wouldn't be surprised as a Notre Dame fan and somebody that covers the team if they had multiple players over 90. I also wouldn't be surprised if it was on the flip side, because right now, I last night I played a game of NCAA and I put Ben Morrison in my lineup because I play the road to college football playoff or whatever, the online game mode. And I always have to sub in Ben Morrison because like technically he's not on the team anymore, but he's like still on the roster. So I'll go and I'll put him in, and he's at a 92 overall. Ben Morrison was. So maybe, but I mean, you never know.
I would argue that there's a good chance Leonard Moore will get the same type of preseason recognition that Benjamin did. Preseason second team. Some people have him as first team. I could see that. I'm very curious to see how Notre Dame's players are recognized preseason, because I felt they got the shaft in postseason All-American honors as well. But that'll be very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Buy, sell, hold. If you haven't been to Israel, you would like to. If you have already, you'd like to return.
I've never been, and that's a buy. And I've always kind of wanted to get back to the Holy Land. Yes, that is, or to the Holy Land. Yes. Obviously, there's certain real world situations that are often present there that make it a little bit risky and dangerous to get back there, sadly. But yet it is something I've always wanted to do. Yeah.
I'll buy it. I mean, traveling has never really been a huge thing for me, mostly because just, family situation growing up. It was hard for my parents to travel with 3 kids. And then obviously now that I'm an adult, it was tough to travel and do all that stuff in college. But sure. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. I don't think Notre Dame's going to be playing a football game in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem anytime soon that I'll be able to have that excuse to go there. But it's something I'd like to do eventually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've studied, I love history, and I've always wanted to go to Egypt and different places, and Rome and different places, but it's never enough to where I would invest the money to do it.
I want to go to places like that, where the oldest buildings aren't just in Washington, D.C. So I've seen those. Yeah. It's cool. You have an appreciation for it. But I think it'd be cool to go to a place where it's hey, this castle was built in 1284, not.
Have you seen Nate Bargatze's latest comedy thing on Netflix?
Mm-mm.
You should. He's funny. I think he's hilarious. And he's clean. He doesn't curse and stuff, which I also appreciate. But he talks about he goes, Europe's really old, guys. He's like, I'm on a tour, and they're like, that building right there was built in 8, instead of 1820, in year 8. It's just it's really old, guys. And
that's funny.
It's pretty funny. But yeah, I think that'd be cool.
Buy, sell, hold from Christopher Crosby. Ricky Collins wins Syracuse's starting quarterback job and leads them to at least 8 wins.
I'm going to hope by that one. I think it's possible. It's hard for me to really buy that with confidence because he hasn't really played any meaningful downs in college. But I liked him a lot coming out of high school, Trevor. I think he's a talented kid. I think he kind of got stuck in a situation where he was kind of pinned between 2 older players in Jaden Daniels and then Garrett Nussmeier. And then, of course, you've got the young stud coming up in Bryce Underwood, which is kind of ironic that he's no longer there. But, he's only attempted 8 passes in his career at LSU. Interesting statistic, Trev. He's completed every single one of them.
Mm-hmm. I did.
He is a 7 of 7 for 38 career yards at Syracuse. You did know that because you would have looked up the stats when you were doing your preview.
Sure.
Now
did.
It was for 38 combined yards. But I liked Ricky coming out of high school. I did. I would have liked to have seen Notre Dame make more of a run at him when he was coming out. But was not in the cards. But he's a talented kid. But he is making his first start, and that's always a little bit questionable. But I liked Ricky Collins a lot coming out of high school, and I think they ended up getting Kenny Minchie that year, so it ended up working out well, for Notre Dame. But I'm happy with the guy they got. But when I was trying to push for Ricky Collins is when Kenny had already picked Pitt, and Dante was kind of I was uncertain of where that one was going to go. I liked Ricky a lot. So I hope he does well there. And I got to know him a little bit during the recruiting process. Good, really good kid too. I enjoyed talking to Ricky. He's a good player, so I'd like to see him do well. And if he does win the starting job, I think he's got a chance to be a good player there. They lost some good weapons. There's no doubt about that, but they also got some guys in. So I like that team.
Yeah, they're bringing back a decent amount. I think Ricky Collins is the favorite because the person he's going up against is Michael Johnson Jr., who has played less football than what Ricky Collins has played. So he would be a favorite to win that. 8 wins, I think, is doable just based on what their schedule is. I mean, I think they lose at Clemson. I think they lose at Notre Dame. They probably lose at Miami, but I think that game will be a little bit more interesting than what some might think. And then you have some toss-up ones. Who knows how Pitt's going to be? They get them at home. They play at SMU. They play at Georgia Tech, who returns Haynes King and Jamal Haynes. They finished the season with Boston College, and that's a team, like I said, they lost to Boston College last year with Kyle McCord and all them. So I don't know how that's going to be, but 8 wins is doable.
It's doable. They're going to have to be really good. I mean, you mentioned at Clemson, at SMU, at Notre Dame, at Miami, at Georgia Tech. They also play Tennessee and Atlanta to start the season. That's going to be tough. But, I mean, going 7-5 and winning a bowl game is certainly doable for that football team. Yeah. And I could even see them potentially going 8-4 in the regular season. But their schedule this year, Trev, is going to be a lot harder than it was last year, in my view. I mean, you're replacing Stanford with who you lost to with Tennessee. You didn't play Clemson this past year. You didn't play Notre Dame this past year. You didn't play SMU this past year. You got Miami, but you got them at home. You played Georgia Tech this year at home, beat them by a field goal. It's going to be tough sledding, but I like what Fran Brown's doing there. I really do. I really do.
Detroit Hunter kind of called his shots and said that Syracuse might upset Tennessee in week 1, so I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I hope he's right. That'd be amazing. I'll be rooting like crazy for that one.
That would be crazy. Buy, so hold. LSU makes the playoffs this year, and Ole Miss does not.
I buy that as the more likely scenario. I'm not buying that LSU will be a playoff team this year, Trev. I haven't made my playoff predictions yet for the season. There's always a lot we need to see. Spring ball. There's still the spring portal window of who do teams add and lose and things like that. I have a feeling this year's spring portal is going to be a lot more chaotic than it's been, just because of the fact that teams know they can just go cheat and buy players and tamper and all that kind of stuff. So if you're having an issue, you're going to basically convince kids to jump in the portal. I think it's going to be a lot more chaotic than it's been in the past. I'm referring to college football, not specifically Notre Dame. But right now, I think LSU is a team that has an opportunity. If Brian Kelly can find some answers to certain things, part of it football-wise, I mean, they've got some really big shoes to fill on the offensive line. They lost both their tackles. They lost one of their interior guys. You're hoping that your transfer receivers can make an impact. I actually liked I like their transfer portal pickups this offseason. I don't think that they're going to somehow just like be better at receiver next year because they had some pretty good guys last year. But Barry and Brown's a good football player. Nick Anderson's a good football player. Chris Hilton comes back. Aaron Anderson came on at times last year. They've got some talented young guys on the roster. You do lose your tight end, but you've got to replace your center. You've got to place both tackles. I think another one of your guards. You got a really good running back coming back in Kane Durham. I like their backfield. I like Caleb Jackson, young kid that's got some ability. Garrett Nussmeier is what he is, right? He's not the stud that people make him out to be, but he's still a good quarterback. They got to find some answers on the offensive line. I actually think their defense has a chance to be pretty good next year. Not elite, but it's got a chance to be pretty good. Had a couple nice portal pickups. They got a lot coming back too. Now the question is going to be how healthy is Whit Weeks. I don't know that he's going to be ready to play. I mean, did you see the injury he suffered in the bowl game? That looked bad. That looked really bad. But they got Harold Perkins coming back, and it's going to be going into year 2 of the defense. And I thought they were a much better coached team last season, and they've recruited relatively well on that side of the ball. So, if Brian Kelly can kind of get that team to play with a little bit more focus and maturity, you look at their schedule, Trev. They play at Oklahoma. They play at Ole Miss. Those are not going to be easy games. They play at Clemson. Then they're home against Florida, home against South Carolina, home against Texas A&M, home against Arkansas, and they play at Oklahoma. I don't think much of Oklahoma this year. But, so that's a doable schedule. I mean, it really comes down to this. You got to hold serve at home, right, which LSU's usually pretty good at home. Brian Kelly hasn't lost a lot at home. I know he lost a home game in his first year, or was it his second year? So, he lost to Alabama this year. And didn't they lose to – they lost a home game last year, I'm pretty sure. Didn't lose a home game last year. They lost to Tennessee his first year. That's who they lost to his first year.
Gotcha.
So in 3 years, Brian Kelly's lost 2 home games. One to Alabama this year and another one to Tennessee in 22 when Tennessee was really good. And LSU was in game 3 or whatever, Brian Kelly's tenure. They don't lose a lot at home. And so you got to hold serve at home, meaning beat Florida at home, which won't be easy, beat South Carolina at home, beat A&M at home. Those are not going to be easy, but if you hold serve at home, then you only got to go really 2-2 against Clemson on the road, Ole Miss on the road, Bama on the road, and Oklahoma on the road. That's doable for me. But as we said the other week, the key for LSU is going to be, can you beat Clemson in the opener? Like, that's going to be big for them, because if they lose to Clemson now, you got to your margin for error got real thin against a pretty challenging schedule down the stretch. So that first game is going to be huge for LSU. When I look at Ole Miss, Trev, I don't love this team this year. I really don't. I don't think their roster is as good as it was last year. The Simmons kid's nice at quarterback, but they lost a lot at receiver, and I don't know that the guys they got in the portal are, you lost Trey Harris and you're going to replace him with a kid that couldn't catch a pass against Notre Dame in the college football semifinals. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see how that's going to go well. I don't love their defense. Their schedule helps. They start off, their road games in league are at Kentucky, at Georgia, at Oklahoma, at Mississippi State. That's it. They play 4 road games next year. They're home against Florida, home against South Carolina, home against Washington State, home against LSU, home against Arkansas, home against Tulane. The schedule sets up pretty favorably, but as we saw this year, Ole Miss is going to lose to some teams they have no business losing to. They will.
Yeah.
So I just don't have a lot of faith in Lane Kiffin figuring it out with a significantly less talented roster than he had last year. It's not going to be a bum roster. Don't get it twisted, but they lost a lot of talent last year, and I don't know that they're replacing it with equal talent. I don't see it. So I think Ole Miss takes a bit of a step back, or at the very best, they're as good as they were last year at 9-3. I think LSU's a team that is one of my sleeper. If they can do this, and this, they've got a shot to sneak into the college football playoffs. So, long story short, bye.
I'm going to hold LSU just because we talked about this when we came out with IBs way too early, top 25, and I had LSU ranked inside of my top 10 because I think based on the things that they have coming back, their ceiling, I think, is one of the higher ceilings in college football, but I do think they have one of the lower floors. It's one of those where would it surprise me if LSU was in contention to play for and or win the SEC this upcoming season? No, that wouldn't surprise me. Would it also surprise me if they were kind of out of contention for it heading into week 10? Also, not really. So I'm going to hold on them, but I am going to buy Ole Miss not making it this season. They didn't make it this past season, and they had a better roster, in my opinion. Now, some of that is based on the other things that happened in college football. I'm aware of that, but they lost a lot of talent. They did, and the opponents that they shouldn't have lost to, it's your margin for error was way too big in you're able to beat Georgia in the fashion that you did, but then you couldn't beat Kentucky. I don't see that changing with a less talented overall roster than what they had. It's no slight to the guys that they have coming in. But you have guys like Trey Harris and you have guys like Jackson Dart who's going to get drafted in the NFL.
Juice Wells is leaving.
Yeah.
They lost a ton, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Watkins is gone. I mean, they lost 3-4 starters in their offensive line. I mean, they lost a ton. They lost Priestcorn, the tight end. He's gone, I believe, too. Right? Caden Priestcorn. So, and it's funny, Trev. I think it's hilarious that the guy who ranked LSU 8th has them as a hold for the playoff. The guy who ranked them 14th has them as a bye. But I think that our reasoning is the same. I'm buying it as the most likely of these two schools. I have the same reservations as you do, though, with LSU. But if you're going to say LSU makes it, Ole Miss does not, that's a far more likely scenario than Ole Miss is the team that gets in.
Absolutely.
I think the most likely scenario is neither of them get in. But if of those two teams, LSU is a team that I kind of have my eye on, I want to see how their spring goes, because there's some guys that if this guy steps up and that guy steps up, don't sleep on LSU. And then, look, say whatever you want about Brian Kelly. I mean, he's not an idiot. Well, let me rephrase. He's not. He may be. He's not like a bum football coach. He did win 10 games his first 2 years. He won, had multiple seasons of 12 wins in Notre Dame. And so, I mean, but his schedule next year's pretty challenging. And if you think I'm going to comment on that, wait till you hear Brian Kelly this spring and summer talking about how hard their schedule is. He's going to lay that foundation early.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But they got a good squad coming back.
Part of my reasoning for ranking them inside of the top 10 in my way too early one is I said at the time, Brian Kelly is just sometimes he's just randomly due for an 11-1 season.
That's right. You did say that. And I just kind of laughed. I was like, yeah, it's very true. Very true. Very true.
Mean, it could be this season. So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. I just like the roster. I mean, there's just there's a lot of potential in that roster, but it's not so good that you're like, it's like a typical Brian Kelly roster. There's some things you like, man. But then there's other parts like, I don't know about that. That could be their kryptonite. And that was his MO at Notre Dame. There was always things like, man, that offense could be really good. And other years you're just like, but this, and this. Boy, that team's got a lot of talent, but they still have Brian Van Gorder as the coordinator. It was always something. And it's the same thing at LSU.
Buy sell hold from Christopher Crosby. Although rarely considered the top tier 2 team by national analysts, Notre Dame should be over Texas, Oregon, and others.
I buy that. Look, I have these kind of funny, just laugh at when people are sitting there making the case about Steve Sarkisian and how great of a coach he is and how Texas is ahead of Notre Dame. And I'm just like, based on what? I just don't understand that. Based on what? And Steve Sarkisian, in his 11 years as a head football coach, has had 2 seasons of 10 or more wins. They came the last 2 years. And he had a shootout win over Clemson at home in the playoffs this year. Needed overtime to beat Arizona State, and then peed away a chance to tie the ball game up against Ohio State and lost. And then, by the way, went 0-2 against Georgia. It's all built on Sark's likable. His offense is fun. He's an offensive genius. And it's all built on the fact that they beat Alabama last year at Alabama. That's where it all comes down to. I think he's got a lot more to prove to say his team is there than Notre Dame's. And then, of course, they have the high recruiting rankings because everybody obsesses on recruiting rankings. But that's still a pretty soft football team. And until that gets changed, that's going to be a concern of mine. Dan Lanning's another guy that, he's so good. Oregon's so good. I'm like, all right, cool. Based on what? A 1-point home win over Ohio State where you had to do some kind of weird 12 guys on the field thing to win that game? And then when they got in a rematch, they curb stomped you. You got owned by Kalen DeBoer in your tenure at Oregon before he left for Alabama. What exactly about Dan Lanning? You got beat 49-3 in your first game. Yeah, but that was his first game. Okay, Marcus Freeman's first game was at Ohio State, a team that Georgia beat by a point in the playoffs, and they lost by 11 in the game they led till late in the third quarter. But we're gonna still talk about that. But we're going to pretend like that 49-3 game against Georgia didn't happen to Oregon and Dan Lanning's first game. We're really going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. And so I just don't see it with him. Like, I think he's a very good recruiter, and Oregon's a very good team. Don't get me wrong, but are they a better program than where Notre Dame is? I don't think so. I mean, if you just go back and look at the last 10 years, Notre Dame's had how many playoff appearances? Now 3. Oregon's had 2. Oregon has 1-2 in the playoff. Notre Dame is now 3-3. So I just, they're flashier. They get higher ranked recruits. They weren't a better team than Notre Dame was this year, in my opinion. So I buy that. And that's not to say Texas and Oregon aren't outstanding football programs, because they are. But I think Notre Dame should be ahead of them. And that's why I ranked Notre Dame ahead of both of them in my preseason top 25.
This one's tough. I'm going to buy it because of the season that Notre Dame had. But leading up into this year, and honestly, really leading up until the postseason, I think they were all kind of on the same level, because a lot of the arguments that you could have about Dan Lanning and Steve Sarkisian, you could also have had about Marcus Freeman.
Sure.
Because
go ahead, Trev.
Because I was going to say,
I was going to interrupt you, but I'm trying to let you talk. That's why I was like,
no, you're good. No, you're good. You're good. I mean, the difference between their first games, I think, is absolutely fair. Dan Lanning's first game, again, that horrible loss that they had to Georgia versus Marcus Freeman's. But I think the critique on Marcus Freeman was more losing to Marshall, losing to Stanford, losing to Northern Illinois, so I think it was more that, if I'm being honest, and opposed to Oregon and Texas not having those losses. From a ceiling standpoint, they hadn't done anything. Like, Kalen DeBoer still owns Dan Lanning, fair, all those things. But you could also make the argument that Ryan Day owns Marcus Freeman right now. He's 0 for 3 against Ryan Day. And so
Kalen DeBoer hasn't won a title, and Ryan Day has. But the other thing, too, is Dan Lanning has multiples like that. And Dan Lanning got beat more convincingly in the postseason by Ryan Day's team than Marcus Freeman did. Like, I get it, but let me say this: coming into the season, we talked about this as a big year for Marcus Freeman, because Dan Lanning was ahead of Marcus Freeman coming into this year. His record was better. He didn't have those really bad losses. The issues that you had with Dan Lanning were the blowout loss to Georgia, and the fact that Kalen DeBoer owned him. Never got dominated by Kalen DeBoer, just lost every time, got out-coached every time. Where Marcus Freeman was having that happen to him against Marshall in Stanford 2022. So I think coming into the season, that's fair. My issue is that even now, after the run that Notre Dame went on this year, where they answered a lot of those questions. Right? Yeah. I mean, they beat A&M on the road. They beat Georgia, something that Sark has not done. Because it's all cyclical, right? I mean, what was the big postseason, win that Oregon had? It was the Big Ten title game over Penn State. Well, Notre Dame beat Penn State, right? I mean, they both played Ohio State in the postseason. Notre Dame was more competitive in that game than Oregon was. So I think a lot of it, to me, Trev, what I think it comes down to is flash. Those guys are a little bit more brash and flashy, and those guys have higher ranked recruiting classes. And so there's an assumption that their talent level's better. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but that's the assumption. So I just think it's when Notre Dame does things, we still hold on to past losses where we tend to gloss them over. So like your points about Marshall, those are all true. Heck, Northern Illinois this year. But Notre Dame has far gone past silencing that, but they still get talked about. Yeah. I was actually, it's funny, is I was about to get real pissed at an ESPN article yesterday. And I was reading it, and it was this thing about, who will be the next football coach to win the national title. And the first one, of course, was Steve Sarkisian, and they talk about, how great he is. And then I went down to, Dan Lanning was next, and then I went down and I read the Marcus Freeman one. And it's like he spent more time talking about some of the bad losses than he's talked about. I mean, the paragraph talking about the bad losses was longer than the paragraph about how they turned things around. They talked about 11 guys in the field, and I'm like, that's just typical ESPN. And then I went up and read the Dan Lanning thing, and I thought, okay, they brought up the no-show against Ohio State in the CFP. They talked about losing to rival, to Washington, right? I mean, so they did mention some of those things. They do pretend like Stark just gets like the preferential treatment. They don't talk about a lot of his negatives, but Lanning, they did at least mention some of those. So we're starting to see a little bit of Dan Lanning start to have some of those questions raised, which are fair. And I still think Marcus Freeman has questions. Like, yeah, the run was great, but can we not have a Northern Illinois type of game next year? That's still that next step for him. But I just feel like a lot of this is based off assumptions that gear around personality and recruiting. and and Sarkisian is a heck of a coach. And I'm a big fan of Steve Sarkisian, but I'm also a realistic one. I don't think he's earned the reputation of a top 5 head football coach. He hasn't to me, because he's a great offensive mind, but is he a great head coach? I think that's very debatable at this point in time. Very debatable. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, totally fair. Buy, sell, hold. At least one of the talented freshman safeties or corners will be a starter this season.
I'm going to sell that. It's certainly an option. It's certainly possible. But I just feel that barring injury, none of them will start, but at least 2 will play a bunch. One of the corners is going to play a lot this year, either as a nickel or as a corner, and at least one of the safeties will play. I mean, Jadon Blair, I'd be shocked if he doesn't play a lot this year as part of the rotation. I think it's right now, based on February 26th, it's a higher likelihood that Jadon Blair replaces Rod Hurd than Jadon Blair replaces Xavier Watts.
Yeah.
Could that change? Of course it could, because he's incredibly talented. But I think right now it's more likely that he becomes that number 3 guy, which is going to play a ton. I just think it's more likely that he has sort of a Kyle Hamilton 2019 role than he does step into the starting lineup. I might feel differently if Jalen Stroman didn't arrive, but between Stroman and Luke Talich and Bronte, I just think that right now there's a better chance that he'll be number 3. And honestly, if he's the number 3 and he's playing a bunch, I would honestly not start him and just take some of that pressure off him, because you're going to rotate him in anyway. Then at least there's a little bit less of that burden on him, where if he's not playing well in a game, you're not, quote unquote, benching him. You're just leaning into the starter a little bit more. But if he's playing really good football, then you can lean into him playing more snaps. And I just think that takes some of the pressure off of him to be like, you're the starter now. That's just my 2 cents. But he's going to play a ton, and he's too good not to play. And everything I've heard about him is he's a worker, so that won't be an issue either. He's not like walking in the door. And anyone that's met Jadon and Trev, you met him once in person at the tailgate. He was at the IB tailgate this year. But anyone you talk to, like, the kid's a worker. He knows he's good, but in a way where it's like the way you want a guy to know he's good, but he's very hungry, and he feels he's got a lot to prove. I think the recruiting rankings were huge for him to keep him humble and hungry, because he didn't get ranked the way he should have. And I think that kind of bothers him a little bit, not in a way where he cares about it, but just like, okay, sleep on me. Tell me I'm not good enough. And he just is one of those kids that got that chip on his giant shoulders. So, yeah.
My answer is a little bit of a cop-out. It's an absolute buy for me. I see multiple freshmen starting on kickoff return, punt.
He didn't say defense.
Sure didn't.
He didn't
That's
say
why
defense.
I said he just said a starter this season. So this is an absolute buy for me.
I love that. Vince would be so proud of you right now for going special teams. He would be so proud of you right now.
I do what I can.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Great answer.
Buy, sell, hold from B. Huey 72. This offensive line comes together this season. Is a Joe Moore finalist and rivals the 2017 line. I feel like we have more talent on the roster than ever before.
All right. If you would have just stopped at the O-line comes together this season and is a Joe Moore finalist and just period right there, I'd have been like, buy. Definite buy. If they're not a finalist for the Joe Moore Award this year, I'm going to be very disappointed in the offensive line coach and Marcus Freeman and all the people associated with it. There's no excuse, in my opinion, not to be a Joe Moore Award finalist this year. None. Not win it, because there's other great lines I think they'll be out there, but you should be a finalist. But I'm pumping the brakes big time on the second part. There's a lot this line has to prove. Yes, they have a lot of talent, but that 2017 offensive line also had the best guard that I've ever seen play at Notre Dame, and it's not overly close. He might be the best guard I've ever seen play college football in Quentin Nelson. And Mike McGlinchey was no slouch at left tackle. Alex Bars was 6'6", 320 and very talented. You had Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey rotating at right tackle, and Sam Mustipher started in the NFL in 2017, and he was a much better player in 17 than he was in 18. So, I still don't know who's going to be at right guard this year. Like Anthony Knapp, like let's say Jagasol moves to right guard, and he's everything we hope he could be. How much better is he than what Alex Bars was in 17? He's better, but not by a ton. I need to see a lot from Ashton Craig for me to think he's better than Sam Mustipher was in center. He's talented, but he's got a lot to prove. With all due respect to Billy Schrouth, he's not in the same universe as Quinn Nelson. And the gap at left tackle is enormous between Anthony Knapp and Micah McGlinchey. Even if Will Black starts at left tackle, the gap between him and what Mike McGlinchey was as a fifth-year senior is enormous. If Charles Jagasol starts at left tackle, for all his talent, he started 2 games in his career. I'm not expecting Charles Jagasol in his first year as a full-time starter to be as good as Mike McGlinchey was in 2017 as a third-year starter. More talented? Sure. No question. But there's a difference in development. So I'm not ready to watch this to sit there and start talking about it. And Emil Wagner's a heck of a player, but Tommy Kramer, Robert Hainsey combo was no slouches in 2017 either. And you had good players on the bench. You had Liam Eichenberg coming off the bench. You had Aaron Banks was coming off the bench on that team. Like, you still had some really talented younger players. It's a couple second-round NFL draft picks and All-Americans that were not starting for you that season. So I'm not going there. Josh Lugg was a freshman on that team as well. I'm not going there. I mean, you couldn't. I mean, what's the kid? Dylan Gibbons couldn't sniff the field at Notre Dame. Goes to Florida State and is a pretty good 2-year starter for Florida State. Like, that team was deep. Is the upside of this team as a whole maybe better? Sure, potentially. It's a conversation, but this line's got a long way to go before I'm going to say that it rivals the 2017 offensive line. Long way to go. Is it completely insane to suggest it? No, it's not at all. That's how much talent this offensive line has. But I got a long way to go before I'm going to start comparing them to an offensive line that had Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Alex Bars, Tommy Kramer, Robert Hainsey, and Sam Mustipher. I just want to see a little bit more from it than we've seen so far. So I'm going to sell the second part of that for now. Easy buy on the first one.
Offensive line questions are tough for me to answer. I think the upside is tremendous. I'm definitely selling rivals the 2017 offensive line because we don't even know where essentially all 5 of the starters are going to be.
Right.
I have questions around the offensive line coach and if he's going to put players in the right position. That's going to be a factor for me about them coming together and being a Joe Moore Award finalist. I think all of these questions can be answered with, yes, I believe they have the potential to do all of these things. I don't know the health of Ashton Craig. I don't know where Anthony Knapp is going to play. I don't know where Charles Jagasol is going to play. I don't know how big of a step Gerby Lambert took. Now, these are all good problems to have, like we've alluded to before. I would absolutely rather have, do we have a 15-game starting, former true freshman start at left tackle, or is it Jagasol? Or do we put the 6'7", 330-pound kid at right guard? And those are great issues to have. But there's still questions. And so, yeah, I buy that they come together. I'll even hold on the Joe Moore finalist, semifinalist. This would be an absolute buy for me because they were semifinalists this past season. Finalists.
I'll be very disappointed if Notre Dame's not a finalist for the Joe Moore Award this year. Very disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Some things got to get figured out with this football team. Disappointed.
And then rivals the 2017 offensive line. I'm going to have to see a heck of an offensive line.
Can we also say that while the Notre Dame 2017 line might have been their best, that might not even been their most talented offensive line? Can we also
their most talented was 15?
Yeah, Ronnie Stanley at tackle, Mike McGlinchey at tackle, Quentin Nelson at guard, Nick Martin center, and Steve Elmer at guard. Yeah. That was a pretty flipping good offensive line as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's get to the next one.
Buy sell hold from Bronco 30CH. Samote Kodoanga wouldn't be a USC commit if Chad Bowden was still at Notre Dame.
Buy. I don't know that he'd be a public Notre Dame commit, but I definitely am confident he would not be committed to USC right now. Like 99.9999% positive that that's true. So bye.
By so hold, it is more important for Notre Dame's success on the field and or recruiting success moving forward to get a dude at wide receiver than it would be to get a dude at defensive tackle.
I sell that with every ounce of my being. Look, you can win a championship with 3 or 4 Jaden Greathouses, or heck, the receiving core they're going to be next year. And there's not a dude in there. When I think of dude, I think of top 15, 20 NFL draft pick. I love Malachi Fields. He ain't Michael Floyd. Love Malachi Fields. He ain't Will Fuller. And that's okay. I love Jaden Greathouse. He ain't Golden Tate. Right? Now, you give me a bunch of Golden Tates, a bunch of Will Fullers, and look, just forget it. I don't even say a bunch of. Just give me the receiving core you have next year that's coached up well, and you can beat anybody with that group if other things fall into place. It won't be because you're receiving core. You give me a dude at defensive tackle. And when I mean dude, I don't just mean like a college All-American, like a really good player like a Riley Mills. I mean like a dude, like a top 20 NFL draft pick type of guy at
like a
3 tech.
You give me Carter.
You give me him. You give me a Christian Wilkins. You give me somebody like that on this D-line, and Notre Dame is going to be – they're going to look a lot like 2021 Georgia in a lot of ways. Because they are loaded at so many other positions. So, and the other thing, too, is here's the thing, too. The other part of this, because you say on the field and recruiting, if a stud D tackle ever comes to Notre Dame, let's say for whatever reason, some top 25, 5-star, top 50, borderline 5-star, 4.5-star kid ever comes to Notre Dame at D tackle, and he becomes a dude, he opens up the gates a little bit. It's not going to be floodgates because it's not going to just see every year, but you're going to start to see them have more of a chance with some of those kids because they're going to look, man, you come up here. Yeah, I know you're going to have to go away from mom and you're going to have to get out of the South and the weather's cold. But look, bro, look what we've done at this position. And you're going to get a degree, you can – now you don't have to go 15, 20 years between Lewis Nixes. You start to get them every 3 or 4 years. That's what I think if you get that kind – if you can just get that kind of guy once and he pans out, and even if it's a portal guy, like a big-time portal, like a big-name portal guy comes to Notre Dame for a year and dominates, I think that makes it a lot easier to recruit that position. And that position has a much greater impact on your overall team success and ability to win a championship, I believe, than having a Jeremiah Smith at receiver. Now, ideally, you get both. But for Notre Dame, give me the dude at D tackle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Notre Dame has had dudes at receiver before, and they weren't sniffing national titles.
On some pretty mediocre football teams. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dude,
now, I would say that wasn't always because of the D tackle situation. But
No.
Yeah. Good submission. That's a very fair question, though, because those are the two positions where I think there's the most debate about whether or not Notre Dame can get a dude. I think it's a very fair submission.
Biso Hold, at the end of his 3rd year at Notre Dame, Leonard Moore will be the best corner to play at Notre Dame since Lou left in '96.
I'm holding on that one. It's a fair question. I just want to pump the brakes on the pressure we're putting on Leonard Moore just yet. Leonard Moore is an exceptional talent, and is it possible that this could be a positive answer in 3 years? It's absolutely positive. Does he have the talent to be Notre Dame's best college corner since Todd Light? Yes, sir, he does. But let's pump the brakes a little bit and just let's let him develop a little bit, because it's a different animal for Leonard going into year 2. Last year, nobody had any expectations of him. Didn't start the season as a starter. Now he's going to get all this attention, all these NIL deals. He just was at some event the other night being named the freshman of the year, looking fly in his suit, mom and dad there. Great kid, comes from a phenomenal family. And that's awesome. But now there's a lot more pressure on him, a lot more things tugging at him, where last year was all about ball. And I always want to see how any kid handles that. That was true of Benjamin Morrison. How is he going to handle the freshman fame? So I just want to pump the brakes a little bit on that, and let's see. But it's certainly possible. I mean, and if you talk to certain people around the program, they'll tell you if Christian Gray kind of figures it out, he could be their best corner. I mean, that's just what people will tell you around the program. So they're both special. Leonard Moore has a chance to be special. I just don't want to start getting into this like let's put all this burden and pressure on him like he's going to be the greatest player in 30 years. Let's let the kid finish the sophomore year first. But I don't think it's a crazy thing to ask at this point in time after the way he played this year with his size and speed. And the thing that a lot of people don't recognize about him, because we get focused on the size and the speed and his hitting, is he's a really smart young football player as well. Yeah. He's not just a great athlete that just goes and plays. He's a really intelligent football player as well.
Could not agree with you more. Definitely let's pump the brakes. Also, let's not forget, to your point, Christian Gray still on the team. Ben Morrison just got done playing at Notre Dame.
Cam Hart was really flipping good.
Cam Hart was pretty good. Julian Love was not that long ago.
Right.
Look, I understand where this is coming from, Bronco. I really do. And I think he has the potential to be. But let's not forget about everybody was having the same conversation with Ben Morrison in the first season that he didn't have 6 interceptions across 4 games. People were saying that he fell off.
Even though he was better in year 2 than he was in year 1, So
I think he has the potential to be, but let's wait until the kid's career is over at Notre Dame to have that discussion. But the potential is there.
I'm super excited to watch it play out. Because he's a really special talent.
The fact of listing off the guys that we just listed off, not too long ago, we were begging for consistency at corner.
Yes.
At Notre Dame.
Yes.
Not too long ago. And now we're in a spot where every new starter is he just going to be the best ever?
Yeah.
I mean, hey, look, man.
I mean, dude, there's years in the past where if we're talking about Carson Hobbs as a sophomore, we're like, yeah, he's gonna start. There's no way that kid doesn't start. Dallas Golden comes in as a true freshman, or Mark Zach, you're like, oh, yeah, that guy's going to play a ton as a freshman. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, maybe. I mean, maybe they play. You know what I mean? Like, it's a great situation to be in. But you also talked about to people around the program that I've talked to, they rave about Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, not just as talents, but they rave about them as young men. Like, they're very well liked and respected by them. But they're very different. Leonard's a little bit more serious. He's a lot more like Benjamin was, where Christian's just that fun, lighthearted. I mean, you see it in the Here Come the Irish thing. You're like, man, that's just a fun kid. That's the kind of kid you just want to kind of hang around in the dorms. Just like a fun guy to be around. Real, they're both excellent young men, but they're very different personalities, which I love. But they're really good kids.
Buy, sell, hold. With another successful season, both Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price will be drafted in the top 80 picks of next year's draft.
I'm not an NFL guy. That gets you in what? The first half of round 3?
Yeah.
Well, how many? Let me go look at recent NFL drafts. I'm trying to just think of how many running backs even get picked. The other thing too is after next year, that next year's draft class could end up being really loaded at running back, just off the Notre Dame and Penn State kids alone. I mean, you know what I mean, Trev? It's like, all right, so last year there was 2 guys picked in the top 60. Year before there's only 4. I mean, top 80. Year before there's only 4 in the top 80. Year before that there's only 3 in the top 80. Year before that there's only 3 in the top 80. Year before that there was actually 7 in the top 80. That was the Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Dillon, Keyshawn Vaughn. Outside of Keyshawn Vaughn, those are some dudes in college. Keyshawn was a good player too. Year before that there's 5 in the top 80. Year before that, there was 8 in the top 80. So what we're seeing here, Trev, is as we get closer and closer to the modern era, you see fewer and fewer running backs being taken in the top 80. And in the last 4 draft cycles, we've seen 2, 4, 3, and 3 running backs get taken in the top 80. You're going to tell me that if half of those guys or 2/3 of those guys are going to be Notre Dame guys, I have a hard time believing that. Because if Jeremiah Love's the number 1 running back in next year's draft class, and Jadarian Price is the 4th or 5th best running back in the draft class, which is really good, it's unlikely that they both get picked in the top 80 just on trends. Again, I'm not an NFL draft expert, but what I can do is I can look at trends. And you can see trends. It's like we were asked this question there's a position we were asked this question about the other day, and we're like, let's go back and look at trends because this just doesn't happen at that position. And same thing at running back. You're just not seeing as many teams put value on drafting running backs that high unless it's a really rare player like a Jeremiah Love. But I also don't think it's out of the question that it happens. I just would find it unlikely because you're going to have those two guys. You're going to have Nicholas Singleton. You're going to have Katron Allen. I mean, again, Trev, just Notre Dame and Penn State alone have 4 running backs that people are going to really like next year. I'm just looking at some of the other backs that are coming back next year. Hampton's gone. Genty's gone. The Iowa kid is gone. Just trying to look at some other running. Dylan Sampson left. So, I mean, there's going to be room for some guys to kind of emerge into that spotlight. But that's asking a lot for 2 running backs from the same backfield to be drafted when in the last 4 years we haven't seen more than 4 running backs drafted in the top 80, except once in the last 4 years. So I think it's just gonna be a little bit tough. And a guy that I'm really excited to see play this year is I'm really looking forward to see Justice Haynes at Michigan this year. Like I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's going to do at Michigan this year. But and some of the backs I'm looking forward to seeing next year, like I think Nate Frazier is going to have a really good year at Georgia. If they just learn to, hey, we're Georgia, let's go back to running the football because you don't have ETN split carries with anymore. He's dynamic. And you got some big backs that can split carries with him to take some of the pounding off of him. But he won't be eligible for the draft. He's going to be a true sophomore next year. But there's going to be some good backs there next year. So it's not that I don't think Jadarian Price is capable of being a high draft pick. It's just going to be more about we just don't see that in the draft. We don't see that kind of volume at running back in the draft. He'd have to be in the top 3 to feel really good about that. So, but he's got a lot of talent, man. He's got a lot of talent. There's no doubt.
I'll say this. I definitely buy that Jeremiah Love will. I'm going to sell that Jadarian Price will. And for a couple of reasons. One, you got to have some sort of a special season outside of like what Jahmyr Gibbs in 22 in college to be taken in the first round. Because he was a first-round draft pick, but he went to an organization that was very much like, hey, we're going to evaluate what happens on the field. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs that year, he had 926 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 444 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. So it's not like he lit the world on fire statistically, but with Jadarian Price, my thing with him is he hasn't shown his ability in a game. Like just because he hasn't had the opportunity to as a pass catcher, and that's huge in the NFL draft now.
That's it right
there. That's like a lot of running backs getting drafted in the first round, like Bijan. He showed that he could do both when he was at Texas. And Jadarian Price, like I've said in previous shows, he's probably 3rd in line on the depth chart as of right now when it comes to running backs that are going to get thrown to out of the backfield. Yeah. I mean, Aeneas and Jeremiah Love are probably, 1A, 1B, and then you start talking about Price or if Jabron's healthy, maybe him. But,
Jahmyr Gibbs caught 44 passes for 440 yards and 3 touchdowns in his last year. And in the year before that at Georgia Tech, he had 36 catches for 470 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then as a true freshman at Georgia Tech, he caught 24 passes for 303 yards. That's where the NFL is.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Bijan, as you mentioned, he wasn't nearly the volume pass catcher that Jahmyr Gibbs was. But in his last 2 years at Texas, he still caught 45 passes. Jadarian has not come anywhere close to that. Not that he's not capable of it, but that's just not – you don't have that dual threat weapon to sell people there. He'd have to be a really dynamic runner to get there. And not that he's not capable of it. Again, if he was the every down back at Notre Dame, maybe he could show that. But, but he's still going to get drafted. And someone's going to get a steal because I love Jadarian Price's talent. But Jeremiah Love is just more of the style of back that I think people are looking for. And that's a part of his game I think is going to take a jump this year as well. Trevor, I'm going through breaking down all the games again because I'm going to do a bunch of offseason statistical and film analysis of the season. And I'm watching first drive of the game, and Jeremiah Love is running a slot fade, and he just torches the nickel. But a ball was thrown at Riley's feet, so he has to catch it off the ground, and then he's got to find a check down to to Jaden Greathouse is like second or third play of the game, and you're just like, you saw stuff like that last year. They just stopped doing it because the ball never would go to him. But you're like, I think they're going to do more stuff like that with him this year. I really do. And I hope that they do it out of 21 personnel more so with Jadarian in the backfield. I think that'd be really, really dangerous to see how teams defend that. It'd be a lot of fun. I'll say this. I hope I'm wrong, Bronco, because I'd love to see Jadarian get picked high.
Yeah. Buy, sell, hold from Bronco 30CH. Buy one, sell one, and hold one. Lord of the Rings movies. Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Return of the King.
All right. So the sell is easy for me. It's the first one. It's Fellowship of the Ring. Have you seen these movies, Trev? Have you seen the Lord of the Rings movies?
Of course I have. Yeah, they're fantastic.
He had something in there, like Trevor, with your age. I'm not sure if you've seen these or not. I didn't include that in there. But I mean, they came out. The first one came out like what, 02? Or no, the second one came out like 02, 03. So you were just a pup. But like Star Wars came out before I was born, and so did Rocky, and I still saw those. But the first one was a good movie, but it was like laying the foundation for the next two. Two Towers is still probably my favorite, so I'd buy that one. I'd hold Return of the King. I loved the second and the third. They were both excellent. They were definitely better than the first one. First one was good, but it was more like a foundation setting movie, whereas the second two were just, they were awesome. And also, I was really a big fan of Aragorn. I just thought he was more of the primary character in the second and third, even more so than the first, which I liked as well. Yeah, so I'll buy the Two Towers, hold the Return of the King, sell Fellowship of the Ring. But if I could, I'd buy all of them because they go really well together. It's one of the few series where the movies arguably get better in 2 and 3. Most series, like The Matrix, loved The Matrix. Second one was kind of Third one just blew chunks. And a lot of movies are like that, where there's a few, but there aren't a lot of movies where the sequels and the third and the stuff get better than the original. There's not a lot.
Yeah, I would order them the same. For me, the movies got better as the stories started to split. Because on one side you had what Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas were doing to go after Merry and Pippin, and then you had Frodo and Sam's journey to Mordor, basically in the final two. And that's how the books were set up. Like Two Towers and The Return of the King were set up in a part 1, part 2 type of format, where part 1 was you started where Frodo and Sam were at, and then at the start of part 2, it began at the same time, but the other group's journey. So I thought they did a fantastic job of that. But I think Tolkien created a fantastic universe. I think it's a fantastic fantasy universe. I think Lord of the Rings, and this is going to make some people upset as well. I don't know if it's going to be anybody on this channel or not. I think Lord of the Rings absolutely blows Harry Potter out of the water when it comes to fantasy series. So I think
as movies,
I think I
haven't read the books. Yeah, I haven't read the books.
Yeah, I think
movies I can agree with you.
Tolkien created an entire universe. Not saying that Tolkien didn't, or not saying that J.K. Rowling didn't.
J.K. Rowling, yeah.
But I mean, Tolkien. He created languages. He created written passage in these. I mean, it's Lord of the Rings was awesome.
I obviously J.R. Tolkien was a Christian, and there's a lot of Christian symbolism in that trilogy as well, which I enjoy. Him and C.S. Lewis were contemporaries. So that was, I thought, also interesting. But I enjoyed Harry Potter's movies as well.
Oh, I did too.
I just think, right. I do think that Lord of the Rings was better. Definitely better. That's why I watched a little bit of the Rings of Power. So bad. So bad. But yeah, they were excellent. They were really excellent.
I loved them. Buy, sell, hold from BJamin 41. The gap between number 1 and number 5 has been the closest it's been in a long time. The 1 or 2 dominate team era is fading away, going off of ESPN way too early top 25. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, and Oregon could make a case to be in that conversation. Alabama's not going to be that far off, I don't think, from those teams. Like, I agree with that, and I think a lot of it has to do with, look, the man. Like, this is what I've seen people say this, like the portal and NIL is ruining college football. False. The portal and NIL, just as a theory, are tremendous for college football. They're being implemented in a really destructive manner that hurts the game. But if instituted properly and run properly, they're both tremendous assets to the game. And they do create a little bit more good parity. And what I mean by good parity is not so much like parity that comes from a salary cap, but parity that comes from opportunities for players that I don't want to sit on the bench for 3 years. I want my opportunity to go play. So I think a lot of those things are really I think NIL and the transfer portal are great if done correctly. They're just not being implemented correctly. But they are also a big reason why this is also a buy. Because you can't just have like Georgia. Part of the reason Georgia's not as good now as they were a couple of years ago, and Alabama's not, is because they would sign these kids and just stash them away for a couple of years. And the players wouldn't want to leave because they don't want to sit out a year, because when they're eligible to play, like after their freshman year, if they were going to transfer somewhere and they're eligible to play as juniors, well, look, just stay at Bama, be a rotation guy as a sophomore, play special teams, because you're going to start at Bama as a junior. So why go somewhere where you can't play? At least here you can play and you can, do this and do that. And I'm a proponent of the sitting out a year thing for transfers. I am that, Trev. I would change. I didn't like the way they implemented it. Like the current rule, it was implemented improperly and wrongly, but I like that idea of it. Or, there's a lot of different things we could do to talk about it, but what we can agree on is the current system sucks how it's implemented. But now these kids they're not going to wait a year, because they don't have to sit out their sophomore year if they don't play as a freshman, or if they don't like this or like that, or they can just leave right away. I mean, Julian Humphrey started most of the year at cornerback for Georgia. He transfers. He's going to Texas A&M. Right? I mean, in the past, that wouldn't have happened. Guys that would have been backups, really good backups at Bama, are now starters somewhere else. So Bama doesn't have the depth they used to have. Georgia doesn't have the depth they used to have. And now teams can go buy players that otherwise would have in the past gone to Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State out of high school. So I think those things have led to a lot more parity. I do. I think those things have absolutely led to more parity. In some ways, parity is a good thing if done correctly. And so that's why I say, in theory, I like the way that college football is going, where the talent is more evenly distributed. I just don't like the way they're getting there. Not NIL portal, but the manner in which those two things are implemented. But overall, I think this is an absolute buy. I think the gap between 10 and 1 is significantly greater than it was 4 years ago, much less 10 or 20.
Yeah, this is a definite buy for me. The playing field's getting significantly more evened, which I think is also leading to better products on the field, and you're getting away from the NFL-esque type of, well, the Kansas City Chiefs are in the Super Bowl again. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs are in the AFC Championship again. Similar to kind of how it was back in the day with, well, Bama's back, Clemson's back, So I would buy that as well, for sure. Buy, sell, hold. We will see a back-to-back Heisman winner due to foregoing the NFL because of NIL before we see a back-to-back national champion because the challenges of an extended playoffs.
I'm going to sell the heck out of that.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen one back-to-back Heisman Trophy winner ever. And it's not even been close. I mean, Lamar Jackson in 2017 wasn't close to winning it. Although statistically, in a lot of areas, he was better in 2017. But what tends to happen, because it still is a media voted upon award, once a guy has achieved success, the media by nature is very let's look for a way to tear down what has worked and what is successful. And so the guy in his second year just is never going to be able to live up to the same hype that he did in the year that he won the Heisman. And I mean, I can't think of anybody that's ever actually sniffed winning a Heisman a second time since Archie Griffith won it. Again, I know that Lamar Jackson, I believe Lamar, he was runner-up in 2017 after winning it in 16, correct? But Baker Mayfield, no, he was third. Yeah, he was third behind Baker Mayfield and Bryce Love. So he wins it in 16 and wins it like in pretty impressive fashion. I mean, he had almost over 600 more votes than Deshaun Watson, who was really good. And he passes for, 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 9 picks, rushes for a bunch of yards in 2016. So, yeah, he had 3,543 passing yards, 30 touchdowns, 56% completion percentage, 9 picks. And rushing-wise had 1,571 yards, 21 touchdowns, wins the Heisman. The next year he goes out, passes for more yards by over 100, has 3 fewer touchdowns, 1 more pick, has a 3 percentage points higher completion percentage, rushes for more yards by 30, and averages 0.9 more yards per carry, only 3 fewer touchdowns, and he finishes a distant third in Heisman Trophy voting. And Baker Mayfield runs away with it. Now, I'm not saying Baker shouldn't have won it, but what I'm saying is like Lamar was significantly less praised in 2017 than he was in 2016, even though I think you could argue he was a better player. His team wasn't as good, but he was a better player. But the uniqueness had worn off, and then they just looked to find ways to pick apart his game, which is why Deshaun Watson was never, in that either. So that's just kind of, yeah. Like Tim Tebow, I mean, he won the Heisman in 07, threw 32. I mean, look, he threw for, 3,200 yards, 32 touchdowns, rushed for 895, 23 touchdowns. Next year, more effective passer, wasn't quite as used as much in the pass game. They had a lot more blowouts in 08 when they won the title, so he didn't play as much. But his last year, he was really good his last year as well, and went from first to third to fifth in Heisman voting. Just because by then his game was just picked apart, just nonstop. That's just how it goes. So I don't see that happening. And yeah, winning back-to-back championships is going to be hard, but it's still going to be easier than it was because you can reload a lot easier now. You go win the title and you lose a bunch of players, but now it's a lot easier to go out there and replace them with dudes. I mean, you lose. Let's say Notre Dame would have won the title, and you're like, oh man, you lost this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. Okay, go to the portal and replace him with this guy or that guy or the other guy. Or if you're recruiting well, you replace him with this guy and still got a shot. Neither's easy, but I mean, you're talking about something. The Heisman Trophy. What was the first year of the Heisman Trophy? Do you know? I mean, it's been going around. I mean, gosh, since the 30s and 30s, right? What's the first year? 1935 is the first year that the trophy was given out. And so that's we're about 90 years right now, and there's been one 2-time winner.
Also, recency, there's just been this trend of the Heisman Trophy typically goes to the player that was not expected to have as good of a season as they were supposed to. It's been a trend over the last couple of years. I just went through and looked, and you go back to the start of this season. The favorites to win the Heisman Trophy. Dylan Gabriel was a favorite. Carson Beck was a favorite. Quinn Ewers was a favorite. Nico was up there. I think Nico and Travis Hunter were tied for the same odds to win the Heisman Trophy, and then Travis Hunter won. You go back to 23. Caleb Williams was the favorite to repeat, and then Drake May was next, and then was Michael Penix, and then it was Jaden Daniels. 22. C.J. Stroud was the favorite to win the Heisman, then Bryce Young, but Caleb Williams ended up winning it. And so I think that there's this not like an unexpected guy, because I do believe that the players who won the Heisman outside of this past season were the players that should have. Jaden Daniels should have won it in 23. I mean, he had an insane year. But it's always the players that you just never expect. In 2019, nobody expected Joe Burrow to have that kind of season after what he did at LSU in 2018. But it's just always that. I think Tua was one of the favorites to win the Heisman in 2019. So it's always that.
Nobody saw Joe Burrow coming like that.
Mm-mm.
And you're talking to someone who predicted him to make the playoffs that year, preseason. And I thought he'd be good, but I didn't see that coming. You talk about the Jaden Daniels thing, but he was not a runaway winner. And I had a lot of people argue with me on Twitter that they thought Michael Penix should have won that year. There's people that thought Bo Nix should have been in contention that year. But to your point, I agree he should have won it, and Caleb Daniels should have won it in 2022. I thought C.J. Stroud should have been ranked higher than Max Duggan was. To be honest with you,
Yeah, I do too.
It's a great story, but C.J. Stroud was a better player.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce Young was a no-brainer in 21.
Mm-hmm.
Devontae Smith was a no-brainer in 20. Joe Burrow was a no-brainer in 2019. Kyler Murray, to me, with all due respect to Tua, Kyler Murray was way more important to that team than what Tua was to his team. Way more. He should have been a runaway runner as well. 2017, Baker Mayfield. I was fine with Baker winning it. I just was kind of tired of how Lamar's game kind of got picked apart that year. Lamar should have won it the year before. I mean, Deshaun had crazier numbers, but Lamar was that team.
Oh, yeah.
He was that team. The last time that there was a Heisman Trophy where I was adamant that they made the wrong choice was 2015. Christian McCaffrey should have won it over Derrick Henry. Like, Derrick Henry was phenomenal, but Christian McCaffrey had over 1,000 more yards that year of total yards than what Derrick Henry did. And we were talking about this on the message board yesterday, but Derrick Henry had 200 more yards than Christian McCaffrey rushing, but Christian McCaffrey had like 500 more receiving yards and also had 1,000 yards of returns and also scored as a runner, receiver, kick returner, and pass catcher that season. So, and I'm sorry, he also threw 2 touchdown passes that year. He literally accounted for touchdowns 5 ways. Derrick Henry was a phenomenal player, but that was one of the greatest single seasons a college football players ever had. The Christian McCaffrey had. He should have won a Heisman that year, but he was at Stanford. If he would have done what he did at USC, he wins a Heisman running away, in my opinion. That's the last time, Trevor, where I really felt like, no. And that's just because he had a crazy season. Derrick Henry had a phenomenal season that year. He just, but I agree with you. There hasn't been a lot of years where I'm just like, oh my gosh, that was the awful try. There's years I might have voted for someone else than the guy that won it, but had no problem with the guy that won it. But 15 is the year where I really was adamant that I felt like Christian McCaffrey should have won it that year.
The only 2 seasons that I felt adamant that they got it wrong was this past year and 2015.
Yeah. I didn't even think about this year. Honestly, I didn't even care. I know that's sad. I didn't care. I didn't think, like, yeah. I guess I just kind of assumed that Ashton Genty wasn't going to win it, so I didn't even think about it. I just assumed Travis Hunter was going to win it. I would have given it to Ashton Genty, but Travis Hunter was also he was a unicorn player. So it didn't bother me. That was my thing. That's what bothered me too, is I thought the debate was disrespectful. It's like, if you were a Genty guy, you had to tear down Travis Hunter for whatever reason. And if you were a Travis Hunter guy, you had to tear down Ashton Genty instead of saying, hey, guys, these are 2 phenomenal players. I think Travis Hunter had a phenomenal season. I just would have voted for this guy over here.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think Ashton Genty had a phenomenal season. I just would have voted for this guy over here. But just as everything is nowadays in social media, it's like, no. Not only do I have to like my guy, but I got to destroy your guy. And I guess that's just kind of, I tuned it out. I didn't even watch the ceremony. But I would agree with you. I would have voted for somebody else this year, but I have no problem with Travis Hunter winning you. I thought he was exceptional. I just would have voted for Genty. I just would have.
Yeah, my thing with this past year, and I agree with you. I don't understand the polarizing of talking about how a player sucks. Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty were both insane this year. But for me, by definition of the award, if the Heisman Trophy is going to be the best player in college football, I feel like you at least have to be the best player in college football at one of your position groups to do that. And I don't think Travis Hunter was the best corner in college football, nor do I believe him to be the best wide receiver in college football. But I thought Ashton Genty was the best running back in college football. And that's kind of where I separated it.
I get that. But when you are one of the best at 2 positions, nobody else is doing that. And that's the difference. I mean, Champ Bailey was probably the last guy that I thought was a legitimate dude at both positions, but Champ never had the production at receiver that Travis Hunter did. But it was also a different era. That's another guy that I look back and say I still think it's nuts that Champ Bailey didn't get more Heisman consideration. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to find the year that he finished. What was Champ Bailey's last year in college? Do you have that? But he was a guy. His last year was in 1998, and Champ Bailey finished 7th that year. But if you go back, I mean, he had 47 catches for 744 yards and 5 touchdowns, rushed for 84 yards, had 310 yards of returns, and also had 3 picks that season, and was an elite lockdown cornerback. And he finished 7th in the Heisman Trophy voting. Now, that was a weird year because you had some historical years, like Ricky Williams had over 2,000 yards rushing. Donovan McNabb was pretty darn good that year. You had Dante Culpepper at UCF. But how Dante Culpepper at UCF finished ahead of Champ Bailey? Champ Bailey had 55 total points in Heisman voting that year.
Wow.
Come on. He was closer to Joe Germain than he was Donovan McNabb in voting. He should have been up there. Michael Bishop was pretty good that year as well, Kansas State, but he shouldn't have been. Champ Bailey was the best college football player in the country that year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But such is life. I also didn't think Champ Bailey should have got it over Peyton Manning. I thought Peyton Manning should have won Heisman in 97. But he's an example of a guy that just kept picking apart his game. And so that's why you'll never see a second one, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think there's better odds that we see neither in the next 15 years than we see 2 Heismans.
Mm-hmm. Mysel Holt, Notre Dame's offense has the ability to look like the USC 2004 offense with Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Lendell White, Dwayne Jarrett, Steve Smith, and Dominique Byrd.
I think Notre Dame can have an outstanding offense this year, and I think their statistics could look similar to that offense. But no, they're not going to be as good as that offense was. They're just not. I mean, Matt Leinart was exceptional that season. Matt won the Heisman Trophy that year. He was brilliant. Reggie and Lendell combined for over 2,000 yards in 13 games. Dwayne Jarrett, Steve Smith, Dominique Byrd. I mean, no. I would argue that Notre Dame has more depth at receiver than that team did. Like their 4th and 5th guys, I think will be better than that. But I mean, could I see Malachi Fields having a Dwayne Jarrett type of season? Sure. Could I see Jaden Greathouse being better than Steve Smith? Sure. But that's a lot to prove of those guys. But as much as I love CJ Carr, I'm not asking him to be year 2 starter version of Matt Leinart. You know what I mean? Like, I can't go there, man.
Yeah.
And Reggie Bush and Lendell was ridiculous. I love Jeremiah Love, but I mean, is he Reggie Bush?
That's the biggest disparity for me, unfortunately, for how high I am for Notre Dame. The most realistic one is Greathouse and Dwayne Jarrett, and
because neither one of those guys were
like
all-time greats. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's actually very realistic based on some of the expectations that we have. That's kind of on point. Yeah. I don't think CJ Carr wins the Heisman in 2025.
Yeah,
Reggie
and
Bush
that was Matt Carr's
Wade.
second year as a starter, and he was actually more productive the year before, which is hilarious. I mean, Matt Leinart in 2003 passed for 3,500 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 9 picks, and Jason White won it that year, which I still laugh at Jason White winning the freaking Heisman Trophy over Larry Fitzgerald and Eli Manning, which is just whatever. Ridiculous. That's why don't get me started on that. But his second year, I mean, he was exceptional. But you could argue, okay, let's just say for argument's sake, the receivers are as good, if not better. Let's say that Jeremiah Love matches in 25 what Reggie was in 04, because Reggie took his game to a whole nother level in 05. Like, we're talking 04 Reggie, which is really good. Let's say that we could argue that Jeremiah Love is every bit as good as what Reggie was that year. I love Jadarian Price. He's not Lendell White, like what Lendell was that year. Lendell rushed for 1,100 yards and 15 touchdowns that year. I don't see that. I mean, he had in 13 games, Lendell had 1,200 yards of offense. Reggie had over 1,400 yards of offense. I just don't see that backfield being that. And even if you say, okay, they match it, quarterback's the big separator. CJ Carr in year 1 will not be Matt Leinart in year 2. I don't see it. And that USC line back then was pretty good also.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see it. I think that statistically they could be similar because the game is a little different. They scored 38.2 points per game that year. But man, that's a tough ask. That's a real tough ask. And they beat Oklahoma 55-19 in the title game that year. They were so good. Yeah, I can't do it. They were also that year was interesting, Trev. They were like the Florida State 99 team. They were start to finish. They were number 1. They started the year preseason number 1 and stayed number 1 all year. So they did all that with that pressure of repeating what they did the year before. And that was a lot. That was a lot. So, yeah. Good one. The fact that we're asking this question and not being like, dude, what the heck kind of question is this?
Good
is partly why I'm really excited about seeing this team too.
Yep. Buy, sell, hold from JP is for Notre Dame. Jeremiah Love is one of the most exciting players for the Notre Dame college football team. In many years, Irish Breakdown is greatly honored that he chose an Irish Breakdown live show on October 15th of 2022 to announce his commitment to Notre Dame.
That was fun. I buy. He's a very exciting player. He's their most exciting player since Will Fuller, and I would argue a little bit more exciting because for me, a running back is always more exciting than a receiver, just because he gets the ball right away, and you're just like, what's he going to do with it? Where Will Fuller, it's like he has a 80-yard touchdown against USC. Over half the play, the ball's in the air. It's not even, you know what I mean? Where Jeremiah Love has a touchdown run and against Indiana, and ball's in his hands second after it's snapped, and it's like, what's he going to do with it? Mm-hmm. I've always felt a running back is more, is just more exciting than a receiver, unless it's like a Rocket type player where, Rocket would get his bombs, but Rocket was getting like tunnel screens and reverses, and they put him in the backfield and he was returning kicks, and, it's just a pure receiver. So absolutely, I'll put him in that category in a very long time. And it was a tremendous honor to have him commit during our show. That was a very stressful period trying to get all that to work and finding routers. The local TV channel hooked us up with one of their routers so we could live stream from it. The quality wasn't great, but it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
All the work that went into it, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And he did. It was really good. Did you ever watch it, Trev?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of fun. And there was like a bunch of IB Notre Dame fans around. So CJ Carr was behind, like out of the camera, because that's how long ago CJ was committed. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It was a lot of fun, man. It was a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, Jeremiah Love is definitely up there for me. That's a buy. I loved Will Fuller. Let me put that out there first. I think Michael Floyd was a more exciting player for Notre Dame than Will Fuller was. Because Will Fuller for me was they didn't run him on as many screens as they did in 15 that they did in 14. He was more of a run after the catch guy in 14, which I appreciated. But Michael Floyd, he could do everything from the receiver. He was housing now screens from the 50 at 6'3", 220. Him and Jeremiah Love kind of take the cake for me, because especially in 2015, Will Fuller kind of became that. I want to hesitate calling him the one-trick pony guy, because that one trick was like you just couldn't stop.
Right, and that's what they asked him to do. In 2014, he hurt you a lot more ways. In 2014, he had that tunnel screen against Syracuse where he cut the ball all the way back. Remember that? He had a tunnel screen for a touchdown, I believe, against Northwestern that year. He had a tunnel screen for a touchdown against LSU in the bowl game.
Against Florida State.
We didn't see him get to do that stuff a whole lot in 2015. They just threw him go balls all the time. It was pretty exciting, but that goes back to the difference between a receiver and a running back. What made Golden Tate so exciting? He would take a 3-yard pass, make 8 people miss, and take it to the house. That was the thing. Floyd could kind of do, and then Floyd would have those contested catches. I still remember that one against Miami in the Sun Bowl We had 2 guys on him. He just goes up and catches it, and then they both fall down, and he goes into the end zone, and you're just like,
I was thinking Golden Tate in that 09 Washington game where he just absolutely torched that defense. I mean, he had a long, like 60-some-odd yard touchdown. Then coming out of the half, he had a slant that he cut across the field, took that down to the goal line, and then like the first play of overtime, he like hurdled a guy, but he like took out his legs and he like cartwheeled in the air and almost landed it. Golden Tate
in that game had 9 catches for 244 yards and a touchdown. Had a long of 77 yards. He also had 1 carry in that game for 31 yards.
Yeah, Golden.
So, yeah. Washington was having nightmares about Golden Tate and Michael Floyd because they played in 08 also out there, and Notre Dame won that game, blew them out actually.
That was a game where Michael Floyd took a now screen for a touchdown.
Yes,
I remember that.
Yes, Michael had 4 catches for 107 yards and a touchdown. Golden had 3 catches for 47 yards. He also had 2 carries for 11 yards and a touchdown. So like they were having nightmares of those 2 guys. And watching that game was wild because I actually watched that game. Somebody put it online or somebody was talking. I saw a tweet about it. I was like, I'm gonna go back and watch that game. And you look at like that Washington team. That was a talented Washington offense. They had Jake Locker at quarterback, Chris Polk at running back, Jermaine Kearse at wide receiver, DeAndre Goodwin at wide receiver. Like that was a talented football team. And but Jimmy Clausen was just, and the crazy thing is it was raining almost the entire game. And Jimmy was just throwing dimes. Just like, God, couldn't move because his foot was so bashed up. He was so flipping good. I know that they're 23 of 31 for 422 yards. That's what Jimmy did that day in on a wet grass field. 23 of 31 for 422 yards against a Power 5 football team. Like, he was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
He was absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, that was a talented Washington team. They just their defense wasn't very good, and that's why they weren't that good. And I believe Steve Sarkisian was their head coach, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. And JP asked also as kind of a follow-up to his question. He says, why did he make the commitment on your TV show versus Twitter or press conference? Did you have a great relationship with Jay Love from day one? Yeah, Ryan had a great relationship with the Love family. And Ryan and his dad had talked a couple months before he committed about doing it on our show. Because Jeremiah isn't a big social media guy. And we had to, not that we had to talk him into it, but like it was more his dad and us coming up with that idea than it was Jeremiah. I think Jeremiah just wanted to kind of tell Notre Dame he was coming, probably put out a tweet, and it's over. He wasn't a big social butterfly. Still kind of is that way. He's a lot more open now, but yeah, Ryan had a great relationship with his dad. I've gotten to know his dad really well over the years, and so they worked on that. So that was something we had in the works in a while. So when I got the call from my sources that he had silently committed, then I immediately called Ryan, and that's when they got to work setting all that up. So Ryan handled the relationship. I handled a lot of the logistics. And so, Ryan and I are doing the show. He's at home. I'm on campus. I got the dome behind me. It was freaking sweet, dude. But yeah, it's just had a great relationship with the family, and the Loves are great people. And that was a lot of fun to pull off. That was a whole lot of fun to pull off. And then we got in big trouble for that, and we're told you can never do that again. But it was worth it. It was worth it. Yeah.
Buy so hold from Irishman 7114. Notre Dame only has 2 guys miss more than 3 games this season.
I'm sell that. I'd have to go back and remember when the last time that has happened, especially in the 16-team era. And I assume he means starters. I mean, I'm going to sell. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm going to sell. You feel like they're bound to catch some breaks with injuries this year based off how rough it was last year. That kind of goes like that, but only 2. That's
Might be a fool's dream, but I'm going to hope by it. That'd be great.
I was like, I don't care that it's never happened before.
Man. Hey, there's a first time for everything, baby. Let's go.
Right.
Notre Dame 2025, healthiest football team in college football history. I don't know what the outcome of the season is going to be, but they're going to be darn healthy at the end of it. I'll tell you that.
I love it. I'd feel good about that team if that's what happened. Absolutely.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Buy, sell, hold. Kedron Young will be the guy that everyone is talking about after the spring game.
I can buy that. I'll buy that that's a possibility. I think it's going to be a receiver. I think somebody, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, KK Smith, I think one of those four guys is somebody that we're all like, whoa, look at the spring that guy had. One of those four, I think, is what we're going to be talking about. More so than Kedron. Because I think if Kedron has a big spring, it's going to be like, wow, we knew he's really good, but he's still going to be sitting behind Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Whereas if one of those receivers has a big breakout, you're going to be like, hey, this guy might be a dude for Notre Dame. But I think Kedron's going to be a fun player to watch this spring, yes. Because I imagine he'll get a lot of work. I don't know how much pounding you want to. Like, I think I'm curious what they're going to do with some of the veterans that, like, especially some of the guys that were a little, like, how much workload do you really want to give Jeremiah Love this spring? And Jadarian Price. Like, why not get a lot of work for Aeneas and Kedron, and Jabron Payne's going to be working himself back into health, and Nolan James? I mean, how much work do you want to give, Gabriel Rubio this spring, who's been battled some injuries, different things like that. I asked how much work how much do you really need to see from Jaden Greathouse this spring? So, yeah, that would be that. I mean, they need work, they need reps, they need all. It's just how much reps do you really want to give them is more of my question. So, yeah, I could see that.
I think a lot of what you're alluding to is we're going to see in the spring game. I mean, it was kind of the same thing last year where, like, Riley Mills dressed for the spring game. I think he played, like, all play, maybe. Yeah. I think it could be something like that. I think guys like Jeremiah Love and Jaden Greathouse will have more than all play, but I would be shocked.
And I care more about, like, I'm more referring to, like, the practices.
Sure.
Whereas, like, getting ready for a game, you're getting 60% of the reps. Like, now I'd say give them, like, 30. Like that's kind of where I'm coming from on it. You know what I mean? Like it just, because your season was so long, because they got all that extra work in the season. Like, to me, people keep talking about, like, because of the longer seasons, we need to rethink spring ball. And I'm like, I agree, but rethinking spring ball isn't getting rid of the blue gold game. It isn't getting rid of, it means, hey, let's lessen the workload for some of our established players and do more to build depth. But you still need that time because, yes, you had the extra month of practice, but your offensive line's not going to be the one that you saw. Your defensive tackles are going to need that extra rep. The newcomers are going to need that extra work. So your quarterbacks are going to need to build that relationship with the receivers. But, do you really need to have Emil Wagner take 90% of the first team reps in spring practice? Maybe the first week as you're kind of getting that new line kind of working, but second half of spring ball, I'd kind of pull the reins back a little bit on him and say, hey, look, he had a long year and let's not take a chance of exposure. I mean, there's a lot of different guys like that I'd be like, especially guys that were banged up at the end of the year. So that's kind of where I would be on that. It's different for every kid. Like, take your chances of getting extra work for your younger players and building your depth.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
For this submission, Irishman, if we're not including quarterbacks, I think Kedron will be one of them. But I think just nature of the beast, I think quarterbacks are going to take the brunt of the conversation away from
the reason that I'm not going with the quarterback is because I don't think we will have one that's established. So I think the quarterback battle will be the top topic. So I think I agree with you there, but I think there will be somebody else that's the individual player. Now, if we are talking about a quarterback, then that means somebody had a monster spring and is really impressed, which would not make me unhappy, Trevor. Whoever it is. Like if Steve Angeli goes out there and just dominates and just far outplays Kenny and CJ, I'm like, okay, I guess I was wrong about that kid. Let's roll. But that would be very exciting to see.
Yeah.
Very exciting to see. But, like, the other thing, too, is like Emil Wagner. Okay, let's say he's entrenched as your starting right tackle. Well, what if he gets hurt in game 3? isn't the spring a great time to get Gerby Lambert a lot of work? And that's how you can get those younger guys ready to play if their number's called. Looking back, wouldn't it have been great to get, Anthony Knapp a little bit more work in the spring than maybe he got? Maybe he'd have started a little faster, whatever the case may be. So that's how I would re-envision spring ball a little bit. It's just more work for the younger players. I'd almost treat it like bowl prep, where you kind of get your younger guys a lot more work. That's how I would treat it.
Biso Hold, Rudolph will be the position coach with the most heat on him going into the offseason next year, despite having one of the better rooms.
It's possible. I mean, I'm hope selling this one, because if this is a buy, that means the offensive line disappointed this year. If the offensive line plays with potential, we're just going to be like, look, man, there's just certain things about Joe Rudolph I'm never going to like. Is this, this or that or the other. But look, the guy put a great offensive line on the field this year, and that's all that matters. Mm-hmm. If we're having this conversation a year from now, then that means the offensive line disappointed.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think it will, because I don't think he's a bad football. I think he's a good football coach. I think he's a good teacher of the game. I think that there's some issues in pass pro that I have a problem with, and that goes back to Wisconsin as well, his time at Wisconsin as well. That's got to get corrected. But I have questions with his decision-making. But he's still pretty good offensive line in the field this year for all those issues. And I think next year he's going to have a really talented offensive line. So if we're having that conversation a year from now, then that's a problem. Because he says heat on him. I mean, the perfect world is there's not heat on anybody because they just won a title or they played for the title again. But if there's heat on him, then that means the season as a whole was disappointing because the offensive line was disappointing, and then that would be There's no excuse for the offensive line not to be really good next year.
I'm with you. I'm selling this one for sure. Biso Hold from Detroit Hunter. South Carolina is more likely to finish unranked than make the playoffs with their schedule.
Well, a lot of that's going to kind of come down to what kind of health that Lenore Sellers is going to have. So let me pull up South Carolina's schedule, because it was kind of funny as we're kind of going through all those different teams we were talking about. A lot of them were like, they get South Carolina at home. There was a lot of that. You know what I mean? So like LSU, they got to go play at LSU. They got to go play at Ole Miss. They got to go play at Texas A&M. They got to play at Missouri. They played Virginia Tech and Mercedes-Benz. Then for home, they got Vandy at home, Kentucky at home, Oklahoma at home, Alabama at home, and Clemson at home. That is a brutal schedule. And I honestly don't think South Carolina is they were not as good as their 9-3 record this season showed, in my opinion. I think they took advantage of having a talented team, had some really good portal pickups, and it was a down year in the SEC. I think even if South Carolina is the same exact team they were in 2024, they're not going to be as good record-wise because other teams are going to be better. That's what I think. So, yeah, I think there's actually a decent chance they finish unranked, because I think they lose to A&M on the road. I think they lose to Ole Miss on the road. I think they lose to LSU on the road, and I think they lose to Bama at home at least. That doesn't even include a neutral field game against Virginia Tech. It doesn't even include at Missouri. It doesn't include Oklahoma at home. It doesn't include Clemson at home. Like, they're a lot like Georgia Tech, where we said before the season, like, I could see Georgia Tech be a 6-6 and 7-5 team, and we're like, man, that team was really good because their schedule was crazy hard, And I could definitely see them being like that. I mean, we talked about Georgia Tech. What did Georgia Tech finish this year? 7-6.
Yeah, because they lost in their bowl game.
Right. So they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, they were 7-6. They beat Florida State on the neutral field, lost at Syracuse, lost at Louisville, won at North Carolina, lost to Notre Dame at home, neutral field game technically, lost at Virginia Tech, beat Miami, beat NC State, and lost at Georgia in 8 overtimes. And the schedule was still hard, even with Florida State sucking. The schedule was still very hard. So I think South Carolina's got a similar, even tougher schedule this year. But relative to their talent level, I think they're a more talented team than Georgia Tech. I'm saying relative to their talent level, it's a brutal schedule. Would you argue, Trev, would you agree with me that if you look at South Carolina's 5 toughest games, 3 of them are on the road? So I think their 5 toughest games are at LSU, home against Bama, at Ole Miss, at A&M, and home against Clemson.
Yeah, they're definitely. I think their tougher games are on the road. 1 and 2. There's a good chance that they go 0-5 in those games.
There's a chance.
There is a chance. Now you never know. We are talking about a Bama team that lost to Oklahoma, and they return a lot of those pieces. I do think they're going to be in a better spot, but I just don't know. This past season was so crazy that I don't know who's any given week. It's just tough to predict who's going to lose to who.
Did you see Shane Beamer talking trash about Marcus Freeman and Dabo Swinney the other day?
No.
He's going to out-recruit them? Yeah. There's a picture of Marcus Freeman with Dabo Swinney, this little kid.
Yeah.
And Shane Beamer talking about how he's going to get that kid to commit. Now, granted, it was his own son, but still, I'm just kidding. That was actually a pretty cool moment. He tweeted out a picture of his son posing with Marcus Freeman and Dabo Swinney, which was pretty cool. He said, but since his mom's a South Carolina fan, I think we're going to be okay there. It was actually pretty. I'm just kidding, but
that's funny.
But he's really, in all seriousness, he's part of my issue. His volatility is partly why they're a volatile team. That's just an issue that I have. That's why they're a bit up and down, and he's going to have to learn to control his. I mean, the fact that Brett Bielema was able to get him to lose his mind that easily, and they actually get along, says a lot about. I mean, his team lost their cool against Notre Dame because he lost his cool against Notre Dame. And that he's going to have to figure that out because he's a smart football coach. He's got a chance to be a really good football coach. He's just going to have to figure out a way to calm the F down a little bit.
Keep a lid on it.
Yeah.
By so hold, Miami will have at least 4 losses by November 1st.
Ooh. Okay. So this is the second time D. Trollhunter has brought up Miami struggling a little bit this year, and I think it's possible. They play Notre Dame in the opener. It's possible. They play Florida 3 weeks later, September 20th. That's possible. They play at Florida State, home against Louisville, and then they have those 4. Now, here's why I'm selling that, because their other games are against Bethune-Cookman, USF, and Stanford. So you'd have to go 0-4 against Notre Dame at home, Florida at home, Louisville at home, and at Florida State. I have a hard time seeing Miami losing all 3 of those games at home and losing at Florida State, surrounded by 2 byes. They're putting all their chips in that Florida State game. It's a bye the week before and a bye the week after, and they're putting it all on the line for Florida State. I just had, because the September 1 game, now I could see them, by November 1, do you count November 1 as is it by that? So by that day, they lose their 4th game to SMU. That would be what I'd want some clarification on. Or do they have 4 losses going into that SMU game on November 1st? But I think Miami's a talented football team. I think Mario Cristobal's not a great coach, but he's not a complete bum either. I just have a hard time with them losing every single big game that they're going to play prior to the SMU game. I just have a tough time with that. I do think Miami's going to be a 4-loss team next year, though. I do. I think at best they go 2-1 in those 3 home games I talked about. I think they beat Florida State, but it's just Florida State's such an unknown. Then they got to play at SMU, Syracuse at home, NC State at home, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt. Those last 2 games are going to be north and cold, because I know you think Virginia Beach, but y'all, believe me, Western Virginia, Northwest Virginia in late November gets very cold. And then you got to play in Pittsburgh at the end of November after Thanksgiving. That's going to be very cold. So I do think they're between Notre Dame, Florida, at Florida State, Louisville at home, at SMU, Syracuse at home, NC State at home, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt. I think they go 4-4 in those games. Some combination of them. I think they'll go 4-4. I think Miami's going to be a little disappointed. I think at best they're 9-3. If they're better than 9-3 against that schedule, Mario Cristobal's figured some stuff out.
By November 1st, I'm going to sell. I don't think Miami drops 4 games before they leave the state of Florida. So I think they're going to be close.
That is so wild,
isn't it?
Because they only play 1 road game during that stretch,
and that's Florida State.
At Florida State, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's nuts.
Mm-hmm. Buy, sell, hold. If Florida drops 4 games this year, they will move on from Billy Napier.
I'm going to sell that because, number one, 8-4 is not a bad year for Florida. Number two, they still owe him a ton of money. I don't think Florida's doing in a great financial situation. The other part is if they go 8-4, so let's say they lose at LSU, at Miami, at Texas A&M, and at Ole Miss. Let's say they lose those 4 games. That means they would still beat Texas, beat Georgia, beat Kentucky, beat Tennessee, and beat Florida State. Like those 9 games, if you go 5-4 against those 9 games, and then your other wins are over USF, Long Island, and Mississippi State, you go 8-4 against that schedule, you're probably a top 25 team at the end of the year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm selling that.
Yeah, if they weren't going to move on from him this past year, I don't see him doing it again with more signature wins on the schedule than what they had this past season, if I'm being honest. So,
yeah,
no, I'm selling that as well. Buy, sell, hold. Deion Sanders saying he hasn't gone on a single in-person recruiting visit since taking over as the head coach of Colorado puts a ceiling on his program.
100% buy. Because eventually you're going to be known for what your record is at Colorado, not for you being a Hall of Fame corner. Right now, Coach Sanders is still able to sell, I'm primetime, I'm this, I'm that, I'm going to do this for your kid, that for your kid, these other type of things. And you buy it because of the track record of success in certain areas. But eventually he's going to get to the point where, like, man, I don't, great, you were a great player, but look what Marcus Freeman's doing at Notre Dame. Look what Dan Lanning's doing at Oregon. Look what Steve Sark, as coaches. And once you got past that initial Shador and Travis Hunter, what have you really done? I think that's a very hard buy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you could also make the argument, like, he didn't even recruit Shador and Travis to come to Colorado. He recruited him to go to Jackson State. They just followed him to Colorado.
I mean, Travis Hunter was a 5-star elite player that he got to go to Jackson State. But the other thing, too, is he's technically not being honest here, okay? He has done – I mean, at one point in time, he was waking up every morning in the home of a big-time recruit. I mean, he didn't do any in-homes with Shador and Shiloh. I'm just saying. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I think Deion Sanders not going on home visits is super silly, if I'm just being 100% honest. Nick Saban went on home visits.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like, that's just –
agree. He said he hasn't visited. Like, home visits I kind of understand because I think those are less and less important now because of the time frame. But, like, you can do those now as juniors. Notre Dame's doing in-home visits with, like, Tiki Hola and guys like that this year. But you don't even do in-school visits?
Yeah. Buy, sell, hold of Kansas State having a sneaky, difficult schedule.
I kind of buy that for them. They got to play Iowa State and Ireland, which is it's a tougher game. Then they got to come back the next week and play North Dakota, who's a pretty good FCS team. Then they got Army at Arizona. I don't think that's going to be a tough game. Home against UCF. At Baylor, that's a challenge. Home against TCU. At Kansas. Home against Texas Tech. At Oklahoma State. At Utah. Home against Colorado. It's a challenging Big 12 schedule, but there's no BYU on there. And I think BYU is going to be really good this year. No, it's a tough schedule. It's a challenging Big 12 schedule. It's not like oh my gosh, the national gauntlet that game is. I don't see that. You don't play Arizona State. You don't play BYU, who's arguably the 2 best teams coming back in the league. You arguably don't play. Now, Iowa State, I say arguably because Iowa State obviously was in the Big 12 title game last year. I think coming back, I like the rosters that BYU and Arizona State have compared to Iowa State, who I think lost both of their 1,000-yard receivers. I think are both gone to the NFL, I believe. So I just like those rosters better. But it's a tough schedule, but it's not a gauntlet. That's a quality schedule. So I kind of buy it for the Big 12. I'll buy it for the Big 12. But part of this is like, go ahead, Trev.
I was going to say I buy it relative to Kansas State. Like I think if Notre Dame had this schedule, I would not say it's sneaky difficult. If I'm being honest, it's like not that it's a cakewalk either. It's kind of finding the gray area in between. It's not a gauntlet. It's not a cakewalk, but for Kansas State, it's a difficult schedule, I'd say.
Here's what makes it challenging to evaluate. The Big 12 is a very up and down league from year to year. You don't quite know how good certain teams are going to be. So, like, I'm looking at that schedule. I'm thinking at Oklahoma State and at Utah in November. Like, okay, like those two teams sucked. Well, they sucked last year. Doesn't mean they're going to suck this year. You know, they're very up and down years. Was that just sort of a one-off because of a lot of injuries for Utah, or is that just Kyle Whittingham's programs is kind of now going on the decline? His time in there is done. Is Mike Gundy's year last year just one of those weird just everything went wrong? Everything that could go wrong went wrong years, and they're going to bounce back and be closer to the team that played for the Big 12 title in 2023? I have no idea. And I think that's partly what makes it tough, because if we were going off of 2023 results and you got to play at Arizona, at Kansas, at Oklahoma State, and at Utah, that's a gauntlet.
Yeah.
But those teams weren't that in 2024. They were all kind of bad in 2024. But that's what makes the Big 12 hard to evaluate. So in that regard, it could end up being a more challenging than maybe we think, which I kind of think is what Detroit Hunter's getting at. But I'm going to buy it, but I don't buy it with a ton of great confidence.
I get that. Yeah. Buy, sell, hold from Mr. Emil Wagner. Malachi Fields will have a similar timeline as Bo Collins last year. He will be the go-to wide receiver early, but will be the second option to Greathouse by the end of the year. However, both wide receivers will be more productive than last year's duo of Greathouse and Collins.
I'm going to sell this. I think it'll be the other way around. I think it'll be because he's not an early enrollee and because Greathouse is going to be there. I think it's going to be Greathouse that's more of the go-to guy early. Malachi is more of a compliment to him, but by the middle end of the year, Malachi is going to take off and become a really impact player. But they're both going to be really good.
Yeah,
I could also see a scenario where neither guy is the go-to guy overall. 1 week the go-to guy is Malachi. The next week the go-to guy is Jaden Greathouse. The next week the go-to guy is Eli Raridan. The next week the go-to guy is Will Pauling. It just depends on kind of how teams are defending you. I felt at times they force-fed Bo Collins being the number one guy. They forced that issue a little bit. I don't think we'll see that as much with and I don't know if that was the system or if that was Riley Leonard. I think it was more Riley Leonard than it was the system, because that's not how Mike Denbrock's offenses worked at LSU, and that's not how they worked at Cincinnati, where they were much more spread the ball around. But I think we're with the whoever's at quarterback, I think we're going to see the ball spread around. I didn't even mention Jordan Faison. I think the ball is going to get spread around a lot more. I think at the end of the year, those two guys will be the best two on the roster. But I think by the beginning of the year, I think Jaden Greathouse is going to be that dude early in the year. And if there's a time that Malachi becomes the guy, I would bet it'd be the second half of the year than it would be, or going into the playoffs than it would be earlier in the year.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'd right in line with where you are.
Yep.
Buy, sell, hold. After hearing the debate on Tuesday's big show, the actual best historical film is Tombstone. Yes, it was Hollywooded up, but Val Kilmer's role as Doc Holliday was epic.
Trev, what did we talk about like an hour before we started this show? Do you remember?
Verbatim this.
Yeah. Yeah. So bye. Because I said to you, I was like, man, I completely forgot about Tombstone. And I told you to watch it. You haven't seen it yet. I told you to watch it. The job that Val Kilmer did as Doc Holliday is one of the best acting jobs I've ever seen in a movie. He was exceptional. Like, with all due respect to Kurt Russell, who was the star of the show, he was a Wyatt Earp. The star of the show was Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday. Not that it was intended to be that way. The intention with the movie was that Kurt Russell was going to be the dude, but that's how good Val Kilmer was as Doc Holliday. Exceptional movie. And it was Hollywooded up and different things like that, but it was it's still real events. The guys that died in that movie died in real life. His brother Morgan died in real life. They didn't have his brother James in it, like in the movie Wyatt Earp, but yeah, it was a lot of it's based on it's a true story with some Hollywood embellishment. Yes, but Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday was exceptional in that movie. Johnny Ringo was a real person. You know, the cowboy rivalry was real. It was really good. Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Dude, I'm telling you, you're going to be happy that I made you watch this one, because Val Kilmer is, because like from you and I talking, you appreciate, like you and I have very similar movie tastes. I've kind of gathered, but because of the reason why we like a good storyline, we enjoy a good action movie, but we also really enjoy a well acted movie, but don't need it to have fun. Like Top Gun Maverick was not like, there was no one winning an Oscar for their performance in that movie, but it was a fun, great movie. Other movies, you're just like, you know, like the acting in that movie was like exceptional. This one to me was both. There was action, there was storylines, there was history, but there was phenomenal acting in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, and every line that I can still quote from that movie, almost everyone is from Val Kilmer. Like there's a couple from Kurt Russell. You're just going to stand there and bleed. That's what I thought. I mean, it's just, you don't have to watch it, dude. It's great. It's great.
I'll add it.
Like,
I'll add it to the watch list. I got some time.
Traveling. You got a top of the list. It's top of the list. And when I'm on the boat next week, if you watch it, you got to tell me you watched it. We got to talk about it. It was exceptional. Great movie. Great movie.
Buy, sell, hold from the history expert. Jadon Blair, Dallas Golden, Madden Faramo, and Chris Burgess will all be playing significant minutes, not special teams, dang it, by midseason.
I'm going to sell because I don't think all 4 of them will. I think 2 will. I
was going to say 2 as well. Who's your 2?
Jadon Blair and either one of Golden or Faramo. I'd lean towards his first 2. Do I think Madden Faramo is going to play next year? I do. I think he's too good not to play. Do I think Chris Burgess is going to play next year? I do. I don't think Chris Burgess ever plays significant minutes next season unless there's an injury. I don't think Madden Faramo plays significant minutes next year unless there's an injury. They'll both play. None of those guys are 5-year players. There's no point in redshirting any of them. But yeah. I that's where I'm at.
Mine is Blair and Golden as well. So I'm selling this with it being all 4 with significant minutes, but all 4 will play.
Yeah, agree.
Yep.
There we go. Hold on. There we go. Okay.
Buy, sell, hold from ND Army fan. The Notre Dame starting quarterback in the 2025 regular season will have more than 2,641 passing yards, 20 passing touchdowns, a 67.6% completion percentage, 2 rushing touchdowns, and fewer than 6 interceptions, a.k.a. Jack Cohn's 2020 regular season stats.
By the yards, by the touchdowns, by the completion percentage. That's the one I'm least likely on. 2 rushing touchdowns by and fewer than 6 picks. The fewer than 6 picks is in the completion percentage of the 2 I'm probably most down on. I think that you'll see at least 6. I could see 6. I don't think they're going to throw a ton, but I could see 6 to 8 interceptions and be fine with that. 67.6% completion for a first-time starter would be a little bit tough, but it's certainly doable with the guys they're going to have and the offense they're going to play in. So if I have to buy it as a whole, I'll buy it as a whole. If I had to buy them individually, I'd buy on yards, touchdowns, both touchdowns. I'd buy on completion percentage. I'd probably sell on INTs. This is one I'd probably sell on. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the common themes that we're all going to start seeing is stats will just naturally over the course of longer seasons. We expect Notre Dame to start playing longer seasons. Numbers are going to start to increase. Although it didn't seem like it. Riley Leonard was 139 yards away from passing for 3,000 yards last year, which is crazy to think about. But it's just they played in 16 games. So yards, absolutely. Passing touchdowns, absolutely. I mean, Riley
His
Leonard
submission says regular season.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if it was the entire season, those are all easy buys except for interceptions, which is an easy sell. But it hit regular season is what his submission said.
Gotcha. Regular season, I'm on board with everything except for interceptions. Completion percentage is a little iffy, but I mean, especially if it's going to be a younger guy. I mean, they're all younger. I think Steve's tendencies, he won't put it in harm's way a whole lot. Just from what we've seen, it'll either be a one-on-one to Greathouse or Fields up the sideline, or it will be a check down, barring more development, which is very possible. But when you have guys like Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr, like, things will happen. You know, I mean, and I think every quarterback is good for at least 1 to 2 interceptions a season where it's kind of not their fault. You know, a pass that hits off of the pads or something, you know. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with it. Buy, sell, hold from Bayside Tiger 6. Buy one, sell one, hold one. It's closing time on the recruiting trail for some major impact players, and you're going to visit the recruits with the best 3 recruiters from any of these staffs, which may include head coach Bob Davie, Brian Kelly, Marcus Freeman.
This is so easy. It's buy Marcus Freeman. It's hold on Bob Davie, and it's sell on Brian Kelly. Bob Davie actually was a pretty decent recruiter. He just couldn't coach. That's some big recruiting wins during his tenure. Just couldn't coach. I mean, and he was a good evaluator. They found a lot of diamonds in the rough during his tenure too. I mean, all of the studs on Brian, on with the exception of like what, Most Oval, and yeah, I mean, on Ty Willingham's first season, the one that went 10-3, everybody except I think Most Oval were Bob Davie recruits. Like, recruiting wasn't his issue. Coaching was. Brian Kelly was a better coach than Bob Davie. He was a very inconsistent recruiter. They were good evaluators, though. They found some diamonds in the rough in that tenure as well. They were. You got to give the staff credit for that. I don't think Brian Kelly had a lot to do with that, but his staff did. And he said staffs. But Marcus Freeman's staff does it all. They evaluate, they can recruit, they can sell, they can close, all of it.
Yep. And I'd even add develop in there because we kind of saw a little bit of that this upcoming past
which
season,
helps with the recruiting for sure.
Sure
Absolutely.
does. Buy, sell, hold. Jeremiah Love will have a lot of Heisman hype after Notre Dame rolls over Miami and Texas A&M. This will fade as Love and Notre Dame's focus is on him keeping healthy for a playoff run opposed to padding the stats.
I'm going to sell that. And the reason I'm going to sell that is this, Trev, is number one, the hype will be there after those 2 wins. Let's say it is there. It won't fade because, as we saw this year, Jeremiah Love is still going to put up really impressive numbers because he's not going to need a lot of carries to do it. You know, the way that when you look at their schedule, for example, and I mean this is no disrespect to the teams that they're going to be playing in the month of November, but their November schedule isn't exactly like a gauntlet of elite defenses. Some of those teams are going to be like, you know, that Syracuse game is going to be a challenge because I think they can score and, you know, late in the year, what's your defense like? But it's not a team I'm worried about like shutting down Notre Dame's offense. They play Navy. We saw what Notre Dame did to them. BC's defense is okay, but it's not great. Pitt's got a good defense-ish, and Stanford, who they'll just run all over. So I think he's going to put up big numbers, but as we saw last year, he doesn't need it. I mean, he had 10 carries for 109 yards against Purdue, 12 carries for 102 yards against Navy, 16 for 137 against Virginia, 7 for 130 against Army, 13 for 99 against USC. And if he doesn't get hurt in that game, he's going to have 160, 170 yards, 8 carries for 108 yards against Indiana. He doesn't need a lot of touches to get his. And the other thing is his highlight. It's going to be highlight reel stuff. So, you know, I think we're going to see, and I think he's going to carry the ball a little bit more than he did this year, to be honest with you. But I think we're going to also see some variations of how they run the ball with him with the different quarterback in the game. And that's not worse. That's not, oh, I'm so glad Riley's gone. It's just, it's different now because your quarterback's going to have a different skill set. So I'm going to sell that. If he's a Heisman contender in September, he will remain one all year. I don't think he'll win it for the reasons he talked about. I don't think he'll have the 18 to 2,000 yards rushing that you're going to need to win it as a running back. But I think he'll get a lot of Heisman love. Maybe he doesn't get ultimately invited to New York, but he'll be a guy that's getting conversations and in that list of Heisman contenders in November, I believe. Yes.
I think the hype's going to remain throughout the season because I think he's going to be used more as a pass catcher this upcoming year. So I think that's also going to contribute to him remaining in that conversation. So, but I do sell this because I don't think it'll fade. Buy, sell, hold. Greg Nielsen. Coach Mickens getting passed over for the defensive coordinator job, and the perception he will move on after the upcoming season will make it more challenging for him to recruit this year.
Sell. I don't think him getting passed over for the DC job has any impact on his recruiting. Mm-hmm. Mike Mickens is a professional. He's still going to recruit his butt off. And although fans have that perception, I don't think that that's something that Notre Dame is going to be telling kids or selling the kids. And I think by the time the season starts, we're not going to be talking about that. By the time spring starts, we're not going to be really talking about that. But I also think in some ways it makes him more appealing to play for. I mean, but look, here's the reality, guys. Kids nowadays especially understand that they can't pick schools because position coaches, because there's so much turnover. So I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue. I'll sell that.
I sell it as well. I mean, Marcus Freeman has kind of had this mantra of like, look, if I support you and your career aspirations, but while you're here, give me 100% of everything. And Mike Mickens has fit that the entire time he's been here. So I don't see that changing. Buy, sell, hold. This is the year we see Josh Burnham show more consistent pass rushing ability, and he finishes with 6+ sacks.
If we're talking about the regular season +1, which is normally what I go with, I'm going to sell it because I think as a big end, it'd be probably like, I mean, as good as Javonte Jean-Baptiste was 2 years ago, he had 5 sacks. That's just not a huge sack position. And I think he's going to be splitting a little bit with Bryce Young. Josh Burnham has 8 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. That's a really good season because he'll be in a rotation with a guy who's going to have 8 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks or 5 sacks and Bryce Young. So I'm going to sell that. I buy the first part that he'll show more consistent pass rush ability. I just don't think it's going to manifest itself to that just by the nature of that big end position. I mean, Khalid Kareem was a pretty good pass rusher, and he never finished with more than like 5.5 sacks. Now, if we can talk about for an entirety of 16 games, then I think he could get there. But in a normal like 12+1 scenario, I don't think he'll get quite there. If he does, then this defense is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Mm-hmm. A lot of fun to watch.
I'm in the same boat as you. I agree. Buy, sell, hold from DMND13. Notre Dame will have less than 2 wins this season by single digits.
I'm gonna sell that. I'm assuming he means regular season. Man. If he means regular season, I'm gonna buy that. If it's regular season, I'm gonna buy that. I think between Miami and A&M, you could see maybe both of those are within single, but I think one of them will be a 10 or more win at Arkansas, home against Boise, NC. I'm gonna buy that just because I think that they're gonna have a lot of wins that are by double digits, but I don't buy it with as much conviction as I do this year, just because I think that the schedule's a little bit more top to bottom challenging next year. But I'm going to buy that because, I mean, that's kind of what the storyline has been the last 2 years. I mean, last year in 2024, they had one regular season game that was won by single digits. Right? It was Louisville, right? That was the only one. And they didn't have another single digit win until Penn State. So they only had 2 of their 14 wins last year were by single digits. You look at 2023, the only win they had in the regular season that was by single digits was Duke. Every other game was by double digits. I think this schedule, I mean, if they'd have beat Clemson, it would have been by single digits. If they would have found a way to beat Ohio State, it would have been by single digits. They just couldn't win those games. This year they won those games, right? I mean, that's kind of the difference. 2022, Cal was by single, BYU, and Navy only had 3 in the regular season that were by single digits that year. So under Marcus Freeman, when Notre Dame wins, they tend to win big. So, yeah, I'll go with that. I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll buy that.
I'm actually on the other side. I think I'm going to sell this because in a lot of those seasons where they were having it, the common theme was they had a bad loss or a loss early. I honestly don't think they're going to lose to Texas A&M or Miami the way that I think about it after diving into the teams. I think one of them will be a 1-point win. I think the other one they're going to win convincingly.
Up in the air for 1 point.
Like a within single digits, I guess. So
okay.
Whether that's, so I guess technically it could be 2 scores if it's 9. But I think that.
Oh, you said 1 point. So that's why
Sorry.
No, it's all good. I just was curious.
Digits. And so I think one of the teams in the back half of their schedule is going to sneak up on them. I do still think that they potentially win one of those. I just think there are teams on the back half of their schedule that I think are a little bit more experienced than what some people are alluding to. I'm talking about Pitt. I'm talking about Boston College. I don't think any of them are going to beat Notre Dame. Navy's another experienced team. So I think out of some of those, I think there could be a single-digit win in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Buy, sell, hold from Fields of Gold. There is a solid reason to believe Notre Dame will close on the top defensive tackle and wide receiver targets in the 2026 class better than the past several years.
Yeah, buy. Yeah, there's definitely solid reason. I mean, the biggest reason is the season they just had, but I would say right now their biggest D tackle target is Tiki Hola. They're in there. Their top receiver target. I mean, I don't think there's like a top guy. I think there's like a group of top guys that includes Connor Solomon, Braden Robinson, Caden Finley, some guys like that. I think they close on at least one of those guys, if not 2. Yeah. So yeah, I buy that. Absolutely buy that.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Buy, sell, hold from walk-on carry-off 78. Notre Dame will do what Harbaugh did in 22 with McCarthy. They will start Angeli because of trust and experience and ease Carr in with meaningful minutes.
I don't agree with that.
So
I think it's a different I said before, we're in a different world now. In a 4-team playoff, I've said this before, in a 4-team playoff, I could understand that. You just got to win that Miami game. It's like 2018 with Michigan. You had to beat Michigan, and Brandon gave you the best chance to beat Michigan. But that staff felt that Ian gave them the best chance to win a championship. Okay? Agree or disagree, doesn't matter. They knew that they had some games where they could, once they got Ian in there was going to be a string of games where they could kind of roll a little bit, and they felt they could make that change. I don't think you should do that in a 12-team playoff era. There's no need for it. Because if you can lose in September to Northern Illinois at home and still make the college football playoff,
and host,
then you can lose to Miami or Texas A&M in September and still make the college football playoff. Because then it's like, okay, so let's say you start Steve the first 3-4 games, and then eventually, let's say CJ takes over. Like, what was the game? Give me a second. I'm going to look this up. What was the game Clemson 2018? I know it was Syracuse, but what game was Syracuse in the 2008 season for Clemson? That would have been their 5th game. Okay. So Kelly Bryant started against Furman, A&M, Georgia Southern, and Georgia Tech, and then Trevor Lawrence got playing time each week, and then they eventually turned him over to game 5. That was a guy that was returning starting quarterback who led them to the playoffs the year before.
Yeah.
Kelly Bryant was. Steve Angeli is not that. And back then, Clemson couldn't afford to lose at Texas A&M in game 2. They barely won that game as it was. So it made more sense to do that. In this era, I don't see the point in doing that. I don't know what value you get out of that, because the thing is, like with when you look at it, is so Notre Dame beats, let's say they go 2-0 against those teams, and the goal is to, how do you justify not starting Steve if he hasn't lost? Like, I mean, I get with Kelly Bryant, you did that with Kelly Bryant, but man, I love CJ Carr. I don't know these Trevor Lawrence, but I don't know that you're going to be able to justify that. And if you beat those 2 teams, and then the other piece to me, Trev, is when I look at it, I just feel like now let's say you start him in game 5, so CJ's first start is against Boise State. He's going to play Boise, NC State at home, Boise at home, USC at home, at BC, home against Navy, at Pitt, home against Syracuse, at Stanford. What's the game that's preparing CJ for the playoffs? What's the game that's going to prepare him for that loud environment of having to play Georgia in the Peach Bowl or Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl? You played him already, and he didn't play. I mean, he came off the bench, which is different than when you're the guy. So I'd say whether it's CJ or Kenny, if one of those two guys is ahead of Steve, you start him. You start him. Learn from those couple games. Go ahead.
I think there's a misconception around Angeli's experience. Yes, he's been with the program the longest. But this isn't a Tommy Rees situation where he came in and played in 2010 and started because of injury and would come in relief in 2012 and then he started in 2013 because of suspensions. It's not like that. Steve started one game in the Sun Bowl at the end of 2 seasons ago now, and he played in one meaningful series in 2024. He has had a different offensive coordinator every single year, with the exception of 24 to 25 when he's going from Mike Denbrock to Mike Denbrock in his second season. Do you know who else is doing that? Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr. I just think that there's this misconception that he is this veteran, seen it all, done it all guy that's just going to be the safe choice. The reason why this competition is so open is because he's not that. Is because he has to go out and earn the starting position over two guys who are also hungry for that position, and then vice versa, like so on and so forth down the line. But Angeli isn't this guy that has started like 9 games over the course of the last couple of years, and now it's like finally his time, and the competition's more to just kind of like serve justice to some of the younger guys. Like it is open. So that's the one thing that I'll say. That's probably the biggest reason why I'm selling this. One, not only do I hate the 2 quarterback system thing, I've never liked that. I don't. But 2, I think there's a misconception around the experience that Angeli brings to the table. Yes, he's experienced, and as in he's been at Notre Dame the longest. But relative to this offense and with this offensive coordinator.
Yeah. One of the comments that Outbound made, but he still has the most time with the players around him, most snaps with the most chemistry with them guys. No, he doesn't.
No.
I mean, we've literally said that the guy we expect to be the leading receiver this year is a guy that is going to be new to the team. I mean, Steve Angeli wasn't throwing the ball or handing the ball off to Jeremiah Love very much last year. He was handing the ball off to the freshman who also worked with CJ. Also, that's so overrated. I mean, it's so irrelevant. You go with the guy that gives you the best chance to win. If you get I don't know why we do this with quarterbacks, where we so overvalue experience to the point where you make really bad arguments and bad decisions about things. Are you okay? So should I say, okay, let's start Jadarian Price at running back next year because he's been on campus and worked with the guys that are on the offensive line longer than Jeremiah Love has? No, that makes no sense. I'm going to start Preston Zinner at will linebacker over Kingston Viliama-Asa because he's been on the team longer and he's been around the guys he's going to play with longer. Why? I'm going to start Ben Minnick over Jadon Blair because he's been in the system longer. He's been on the team longer, been around the guys he's going to be playing with longer. I'm going to start Chance Tucker once he comes back from injury over Leonard Moore because you get what I'm saying? Where does it end? I mean, you play the guy that gives you the best chance to win. If that's Steve Angeli, then play him.
Yes, 100%.
But if he's not that guy, you don't then use these arbitrary factors he's been around these guys longer to start him. I don't know why we do that at quarterback and not anywhere else. It makes no sense. If Steve Angeli outplays the other 2 guys, you start him. And that's the reason why. Not because he's thrown more routes on air to the guys he's playing with more. It's because he gives you the best chance to play. If CJ Carr outplays Kenny and Steve, I don't care how long he's been in the system. That only matters if they're a freshman. It's an irrelevant thing to say. It's not even in my top 10 of reasons. because it doesn't matter about that. The performance is what matters. Steve had been around those guys last year too, and look who looked better in the spring game and in the Jersey scrimmage. CJ. CJ's the guy that was finding backside digs to guys that Steve Angeli had been on campus with a lot longer than CJ had. That stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not an advantage. It's not an advantage. Not to the it's an advantage if you're talking about a true freshman. We're not talking about a true freshman. We're talking about a guy that's going into a second year in the program. It's irrelevant. I don't know why some people just like to grab onto these irrelevant things that just that we don't apply anywhere else. It makes no sense.
I know. Because if that was the case, Evan Sharpley should have started over Jimmy Clausen. Tommy Rees should have started over Everett Golson.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Steve Angeli had more chemistry with the guys at the start of 2024 than what Riley Leonard did.
100%.
I mean, it's just
Kenny Minchie did that. Kenny Minchie had more experience with the guys around him than Riley Leonard did.
Yeah, Riley didn't even play in the spring of the year that he started. Yep. Buy, sell, hold from Coleman Smith. Notre Dame lands a 3-man linebacker class of Davis Jr., Jacoby Clapper, and
Talanoa Illy.
Talanoa. Thank you.
Sell. They're not going to land Illy. I think they'll get the first two. I think the third linebacker will be more someone along the lines of Simeon Caldwell, who I like a lot. I'd be thrilled with that 3-man class. They're not going to land him. Not where things are right now. He listed a top 7 of kind of where he's going to visit. Notre Dame's on there, but they're 6th or 7th out of 7 right now.
Gotcha. Buy, sell, hold. The offensive line from left to right will be Jagasaw, Shrouth, Craig, Lambert, Wagner.
Hard sell. I'd be shocked if that's the starting lineup. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I'd just be shocked if it was. I don't see how, barring injury, I don't see how Joe Rudolph doesn't have Anthony Knapp starting somewhere. I don't think y'all appreciate how much Joe Rudolph loves Anthony Knapp. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I mean, Trev, you and I have argued you got to find somewhere for that kid to play. He's earned that shot to be number 1 somewhere. We just disagree with Joe Rudolph on what position that might be. But barring injury, I don't see this. Now, if you were to tell me, if you were to replace Knapp for Craig, then we might be cooking a little oil. I might be feeling that one a little bit. But no, I don't see a scenario in which Anthony Knapp, barring injuries, not starting somewhere. And that's not even a biased Joe Rudolph. I mean, that kid, that's why I keep saying move him inside, because I think inside you get rid of the one liability he showed as a freshman and you just let him be more of a dominant run blocker and he doesn't have to play in space as much. And that's a pretty good freaking football player. Because I said this the other day, you could argue that for much of this season, Anthony Knapp was your best individual run blocker.
Yeah.
It's pass pro that's the problem. As a left tackle, that's my issue. So
I'm with you.
I wouldn't be upset about this. I mean, that's the thing I love about the talent on the offensive line. You could put Knapp in for somebody, and I'm going to be excited about it. You could put Sullivan Absher in there for somebody, I'm going to be excited about it. You could put Christopher Tarrick in there, I'd be excited about it. You could put Will Black in there, I'm excited about it. Like, there's a lot of talent coming back in the offensive line. And all I care about ultimately is that Joe Rudolph truly puts the best 5 out there. And if the best 5 is Anthony Knapp at left tackle, because that's how he plays in the spring, and Jagasaw at right guard because they think Knapp's ready, his game is going to take off, he's playing at a high level, and they think Jagasaw can be elite guard, let's see how it plays out. I can live with that if it's done because that's how the performance during practice shows that they should be. I'm cool with that. What I don't want you to do is to arbitrarily say, I love this guy here, and even though he's not playing better than someone else, I'm still going to play him there. That would be my only issue. But, like, I'm not one of those let's get Knapp out of the starting lineup people. I'm just like, let's put him in a position where his game is ideally suited. Better suited, I should say. That's the only argument that I make here. But there's a scenario which you could look at 8-9 different combinations that would make me very happy. It just as long as those are the 5 that earned it. Because there's a lot. If Sullivan Absher's on that list, I'm not all right. Oh, well, I guess that's not it. No, okay, cool. Let's roll. There's a lot of different combinations that can make this line really good, and that's why there's no excuse not to be good. Because you could lose 2 starters from this lineup, 3 starters from this lineup, and say, okay, so you lose Craig and you put Knapp or Otting in there. All right. You lose Jagasol and you got to put Knapp or Will Black in there. You lose one of the guards and you got to put, Sullivan Absher or Anthony Knapp or, Christopher Tarek in there. You're like, yeah, you lose Wagner at right tackle and you put Gerby Lambert in there. You're like, okay, they're good. Yeah, I mean, it's like this. That's how excited I am about this line. There's no excuse for this line not to be outstanding next year. None. And I'm excited to see what they're going to be. But don't know what the list is going to look like. A pretty good idea. Just brace yourselves for Anthony Knapp, barring injury, being the left tackle next year. I keep saying this, but just prepare yourself for that.
Yep.
I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. It may end up being the best. It may end up being the best group of combination of 5. We'll see, but just prepare yourself for that.
I'm with you. We have very similar thoughts about the offensive line. Buy, sell, hold. Will Pauling and Jordan Faison will be 1A and 1B in the slot, forcing Jaden Greathouse to the field.
If something forces Jaden Greathouse to the field, that's a mistake. Because neither one of those guys are as good as Jaden Greathouse. So your number one priority is making sure you put Jaden Greathouse in the position where he's going to thrive the best. Not move him to outside so you can get one of those guys in the slot. I don't think that'll be the case. If I had to predict, I would say one of those 2 starts at the field, out the Z position, and then the other one rotates in at both spots. I think it'll be more of a 3-man rotation where they all 3 play both spots, more so than Greathouse gets moved outside and he stays out there. And if he does move outside, it's because they tried him there and he goes off, not because he's forced out there by this. That'd be my take, Coleman. So it's a good question because there's a lot of questions about how is the lineup going to look at receiver? What is the best alignment at receiver? That's a fair question. But especially since Jordan Faison's not even going to be out there in the spring, he'll be out there like he was this last spring, where he's at practice, but he's not out there working.
Yeah.
To me, this spring is a great time to try this kind of thing out, though. I will say that. You give Jaden Greathouse some reps in the field and the boundary to see how he is. So if for any other reason that you can then move him around and for different matchups, and I'm fine with that. Coleman said Will Pauling, in my opinion, is very underrated. Brian, we agree to disagree. What does that have to do with Will Pauling? What does that have to do with anything I just said? So are you saying that you think Will Pauling's better than Jaden Greathouse? I said yesterday that I think Will Pauling is going to end up starting for Notre Dame. I just think he's going to start at Z, not in the slot. So I don't know what you're agreeing to disagree about. He was never a 1,000-yard receiver in the Big Ten. Not once. He said 1,000-yard receiver in the Big Ten twice. He literally never had even 900 yards. Only had 400. He's only been over 410 yards once. So again, Will Pauling's a very good player. I just think with how his game is, I think he's better suited at Z. But I'm just gonna have to disagree with you if you think he's better than Jaden Greathouse.
I think
we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that.
I think there's a lot of people that get too wrapped up in all right, Malachi Fields is coming in to play the boundary. He's going to take 100% of the snaps in the boundary. Like Jaden Greathouse is a slot guy. He's going to take 100% of every single snap. I think Mike Denbrock is going to do very similar in 2025 what he did in 2023 with LSU. He's just going to move a lot of people around.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I hope so.
Me too.
And that's why I say I think those 3, if they're the guys, will play somewhat interchangeably. But you're not going to take your best returner and move him away somewhere else unless he proves he's better there.
Yep.
I don't see that one.
Buy, sell, hold. The quickness of the college football higher-ups to go away from the 12-team playoff will end up being a negative. I don't necessarily believe more is better. 8 to 12 is a perfect number to decide a champion.
Well, I buy your premise. So I buy number 1, Coleman. I don't buy number 2. And so let me explain it, Trevor. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I think the quickness in which they went away from a 12-team playoff is a negative. I think that they were, especially the reasons for it, they were very reactionary to what they perceived to be a not overly entertaining first 2 rounds. The reality is adding teams to that is not going to change that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. They've always wanted to go bigger than 12. That was the whole point. They couldn't go from 4 to 16. That wasn't going to get passed. So 12 was the arbitrary number until the Big Ten and SEC were taking over in 2026, and they could pretty much tell everybody else what they're going to do. Because that means more teams in the playoffs and more money and all that. That's always what it was about. I think the reactions to this are going to bite them in the butt. I just wish they would just learn to be honest. What's so hard about that? Why do we have to lie about our reasoning? Well, it's because the blowouts in the first round. You think that's going to change by adding the next 2 teams that were not even good enough to make this playoff is going to somehow make for more entertaining games in the first round? Are you kidding me? You think that Boise State and Arizona State, like, not getting buys made for less entertaining games? With all due respect, the Boise State and Arizona State quarterfinal games were far more entertaining than any of the first round games. Boise played with Penn State for a while. Arizona State took Texas to overtime. And your big hang up is that those teams got buys? Like, Arizona State took Texas to overtime. The argument is that Texas should have got the bye. Why? Did you watch that game? So it's just be honest. Listen, we always wanted to get to 16 or 14 or whatever it is. We just knew it had to be a process. We had to see how it went with 12, make sure that the expanded timeline would work, blah, 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 blah. But this is all. Just be honest. Stop lying to us, because your lies make you look stupid. Because no one on the planet, go at every level of football, and the first round of the playoffs are always filled with blowouts. Did you watch the Broncos-Bills first? I didn't actually, but I saw the box score. You know, like, this is always true. I've talked about this going back to when the Broncos won the Super Bowl in 1998. Oh, actually, yeah, it'd have been 1998. I mean, they blew actually 1997. The first year they won the Super Bowl, they got a rematch against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who beat them the year before, upset them in the year before in the playoffs. They beat them, like, was it 42-17? I'm looking up the score now. Yeah, playoffs. Where's the playoffs? Yeah, where are we? They beat the Jaguars 42-17 in the wild card game. And then the next year, the Broncos got the Dolphins in their first playoff game. They didn't play in the wild card that year. And they beat the Dolphins 38-3. Won the Super Bowl 34-19, and it wasn't that close. You know, so it's like, look at the playoffs this year. I mean, you're telling me every single game that we saw this year was entertaining, close game of the best in the NFL? Of course not. You know, I mean, Baltimore beat Pittsburgh by 2 touchdowns. Buffalo beat Denver 31-7. Houston beat the Chargers 32-12. The Rams beat the Vikings 27-9. Philly beat Green Bay 22-10. Like, all right. The second round, decent games. Washington smacked Detroit a little bit. Conference NFC Championship, Philadelphia Eagles won 55-23. Super Bowl, Eagles won 40-22, and it wasn't that close. Stop lying to us. Just tell us just be honest. Listen, this is what we're always going to do. People will accept that. So it's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. Yeah, it's very frustrating. But the second part is where I disagree with you. Because once you get past 8, I don't care. I don't care if it's 14 or 16 compared to 12. I don't care. You're going to get the same number of rounds. You're just going to get, 2 more games in the first round.
Yeah.
All right, whatever. Let's dispatch with teams 15 and 16 so we don't have to deal with this anymore, and those teams can get their payments, and then we get to the quarterfinals and we can start working on who the best teams are. That's what it's going to be. So, to me, once you go past 8, and I don't even know that 8 is necessarily – I mean, look, I you know my system, Trev. Play the bowl games and then pick your 4 after that. or even if you want to pick your 2 after that. But there's not a huge difference for me between 8 and 12 and 16, or 12 and 16. They were never going to stop at 8. I mean, so I don't disagree with your premise, Coleman. I think fewer teams is better. I didn't love 4. I would have, if you're going to expand, I'd say go to 8, and that's good. But that was never going to happen, because it's not about picking the best teams in a championship. It's always been about money. They were never going to only have 8 playoff games, because that wasn't going to be enough money for the Big Ten and the SEC to get. It was never going to happen. So if you're going to go past 12, might as well go to 16. So not that more is better. I think more is better from the standpoint of, if you go to more, Trev, then we're just going to go 116, 215, 314, 413, 512, 611, 710, 8, 9, and we don't have to worry about the buys and this and that and the other thing. And it just, it is what it is.
Which I think really stinks, because if people didn't like the blowouts in the first round between like 5 and 12, they're not going to like the blowouts between 1 and 16.
100%. And 2 and 15, and 3 and 14, and exactly.
I didn't mind 12. I mean, it was the first year of it this year I liked, just because there's no perfect model that eliminates blowouts. Never has been, never will be. My fear is I know the whole 16 team premise is going to last for a while, until they see the opportunity to make more money. Because if we're having the conversation around, well, I mean, if you're going to go with 12, you might as well go to 16. And then I can guarantee you, in 5 to 8 years, well, I mean, if we're at 16, what's 20? Like, that's the path that it's starting to go down. It's like, look, at some point, you just kind of have to acknowledge that not every program is just a championship caliber program.
Right.
Or a team that season. You might be a championship caliber program based on what you got coming down the pipe. Like, Indiana had a magical season. They were not a championship caliber football team that year. It was the first year doing it. Great season. Don't want to take it away from them. But that's why I like an expanded playoff, because it's like there might be some teams that might not have gotten to showcase it. Ohio State probably wouldn't have made a 14 playoff, and they won the national.
Oh, they definitely. I think Notre Dame would have been in.
I do too.
Over Penn State, because like everybody says, well, Notre Dame wouldn't have been in either. Well, that's not necessarily true. They didn't have to move Notre Dame and Penn State and Texas, because it was a 12-team playoff. I think if this was a 14 playoff, you'd have seen more movement in the last couple weeks. There was no need for it. And so I think, but Ohio State had no chance of getting in after they lost to Michigan. But would they have lost to Michigan in a 14 playoff era? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe they'd have been a little bit more focused, knowing we can't afford a loss. Who knows? There's so many what ifs that we don't know the answers to.
Yeah,
but the one thing we do know is that Ohio State, with how their season went, was absolutely not going to be in a 14 playoff.
Nope. So that's where I'm at with it. 8 to 12. Sure, I don't mind the first round games in a 12-team playoff. I'm in the same boat as Brian, that I think you really start deciding who the championship caliber S teams are during the quarterfinals. And I said that going into it. I mean, in going into this 12-team playoff, it was round 1, you're separating good teams from the great teams. Quarterfinals, you're separating the great teams from the elite teams. And in the semifinals, you separate elite teams from championship caliber teams. And I think that was kind of on display this year. So, but again, my fear is just the road that it's headed down. Because by 2032, who knows? Maybe it's we're already at 20. Might as well go.
Yeah, I honestly don't think it'll go past 16. I don't. Because I think it's going to be. I think there does become a point in time where you see diminishing returns. We already saw that with the 12. That's going to get even worse with the 16.
Yeah.
I think the first 2 rounds of the playoffs most years are going to be really boring. Most years. And they're going to be like, you're going to add more to that? No.
Gosh, 1 versus 16 is just going to be a slaughter.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this year it would have been Oregon against Clemson. I don't think that would have gone well. because I think Clemson would have still been behind Alabama if we were doing it the way that we did it before. Because what was it? So the last week of the rankings, it would have been Oregon versus Clemson, Georgia versus South Carolina, Texas versus Ole Miss, Penn State versus Miami, Notre Dame versus Arizona State, Ohio State versus Alabama, Tennessee versus SMU, Indiana versus Boise. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Texas versus Ole Miss would have been interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think Penn State would have smashed Miami. Notre Dame would have smashed Arizona State. Ohio State would have smashed Alabama. Tennessee, SMU might have been good, and Boise, Indiana would have been good. But nobody would have cared that Boise, Indiana was the best game of the weekend. Nobody would have cared if Tennessee and SMU played a good game. Nobody would have cared. Most of those games would have been really ugly. And then round 2 would have been Georgia or Oregon versus the winner of Indiana, Boise. Georgia would have played the winner of Tennessee, SMU. Texas would have played the winner of Ohio State and Alabama. So that would have been a good game. Penn State would have played the winner of Notre Dame and Arizona State. So a couple of those games in the second round would suck, and a couple of them would be good. But we got 2 of those games anyway. We got Notre Dame and Penn State. We got Texas, Ohio State. Now you want to speed up and get those games sooner as opposed to semifinal games. So, yeah.
Yep.
Last couple, Trev.
All right, brother. Buy, sell, hold from Riker Ferg. Once the 16-team playoffs announces with Big Ten and SEC get 8 total auto bids, this is the final nail in the coffin for college football fans, i.e. the 1994 baseball strike.
No, I think the final nail in the coffin for college football is when that comes to college football, when the strike comes to college football, and I think it will happen. I think there will come a point in time where there will be enough lawyers that are going to look for enough opportunities to get some sort of collective bargaining strike type thing going on, where they convince enough players to sit out, enough teams to sit out, that it will ruin it. I think the only way that a 16-team playoff has that kind of damage to college football is if they just make for every year the playoffs are just SEC and Big Ten teams advancing because of the way that they set up the matchups. I think that would be the only thing, is if it just becomes really bad football. And I don't think it'll be bad football. I don't. I don't. If you're okay in a 12-team playoff, guys, you shouldn't be upset about a 16-team playoff. It's not a whole lot different. It's adding 2 games on the first weekend. That's it. After the first round, it's back to what it was this year: 8, 4, and 2. I don't know why 16 should change your opinion that much. I think the only thing that would, and again, the issue is the automatic bids. If they didn't do that, most years they would get 4 or 5 anyway. So, which is what makes it so dumb that they're fighting so hard for this. But I don't know. I mean, just like the NFL, college football fans are loyal, and they'll let you treat them like crap all the time, and they'll keep coming back and say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" I mean, you can crap on them all. I mean, Notre Dame's talking about people talking about canceling the blue gold game, and people are like, "Yeah, it's fine. It's totally fine." Yeah, they're crapping all over you, and you're like, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" And because as sports fans are some of the most, we will let ourselves be treated so terribly by the teams we love. How so? Obnoxious ticket prices. You got to have 4 different streaming services in order to watch your team play every week. You got to pay $10 for a drink at a game, $8 for a bad hot dog, $50 for parking. Just totally crapping on you. Canceling the spring game. Doing all these. It costs you $500 to get a hotel room every time there's a home weekend in South Bend. And you'll say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" That's how we are sports fans. It's like, so they're not going to kill it unless they just don't play. The reason that the baseball thing happened is because they stopped. They said, "We are not playing the ultimate thing in this sport. I don't think college football will ever do that. I think there will be a work stoppage at some point in time. I do believe that. And that will turn a lot of people off. But short of that, a 16-team playoff is not going to do that. Because the normies are still going to be normies. They're still going to say, you know, yeah, I know I could barely afford to do this month, but I got to make sure I still – I mean, have you guys ever watched Paul Feinbaum's show? There's a lot of people who can't afford to pay the mortgage that are still going to make sure they can go to Alabama games. Let's just be real about that. Because in this country, there's nothing more important to us than our sports teams for a big swath of us. And that's just the reality of it. I mean, I love the fact we have that passion, but let's be real about it. The fact that we don't hold these entities accountable is why they keep doing what they're doing. If they thought at all that if they did this, and this, we'd stop going, they would have never done it in the first place. But they know we'll show up. We'll keep coming. We'll keep doing this because we are, as an entity, we are just like soccer fans are in Europe. Doesn't matter how bad you crap on us. We're just going to say, thank you, sir. Can I have another? I'm going to keep on coming. Am I wrong? Give me any evidence at all that I'm wrong. It's sad. Like Josh Finn just said, coming to one Notre Dame game is literally a year-long savings endeavor for some families. That's true of local families who don't even have to pay for hotels. I have a buddy of mine who's a pastor here, and I don't know that he's been to a game that I haven't got him tickets for because it's so expensive. He's got 5 kids. You know, it's like it shouldn't be that way, but it is because they don't care because they know somebody's going to pay for it. They know they're going to still sell out and someone's going to pay for it. So we give ourselves too much credit for this whole nail in the coffin thing. It would take a work stoppage for it to happen, just like it did for baseball, just like it did for basketball.
Fair enough. Buy, sell, hold, dead period.
This is the last, by the way. This is the last.
All right. Sounds good, man. Buy, sell, hold from Riker for dead period idea. No high school recruiting from the months of March 1st to September 30th. Exception for official on-campus visits. That was made between October 1st and February 28th or 29th.
I'm going to sell this. That's way too much time for you not to be able to engage in recruiting. Both sides, for players and recruits. What I would say is there needs to be a month 2 months during the year where there's nothing. July should be a 1,000% dead period. I'd say July and August should be 1,000% dead. Can't call, can't talk. And that's good for both high school players and coaches because recruiting staff can't contact, collectives can't contact. There's zero communication because now players can get into July. They can play, coaches get into July. They can take their family vacations and not have to worry about falling behind on a recruit. High school kids can go on their vacations and have the same thing. They start their summer workouts, not have to worry about recruiting. None of that. That would be the no high school recruiting whatsoever from July 1st until September 1st. Complete dead period, meaning no communication of any kind from anyone affiliated with an institution. Kids can reach out if they have certain questions, but that's it. You can't contact the kid and tell him to call you. You know, and I would do that. That would be my dead period. But March 1st to September 30th is way too much. Way too much. Way too much downtime where you can't communicate. Because a lot of these kids are going to have questions about things. They need knowledge. Hey, how do I do this admissions process? How do I fill out this form? How do I do this? How do I apply for this? Way too much dead time. Way too much dead time.
The final one, buy, sell, hold from Riker for bowl games idea. Instead of bowl games at the end of the year, move the bowl games to the start of the year.
Then they cease being bowl games. They just become like kickoff classics. A bowl game is something you earn based on what you've done that season. So when you play in the Rose Bowl, it's because you went through the entire season and you won the Big Ten or the Pac-12 and you get to the bowl game. This is now you're just arbitrarily scheduling 2 teams to play in a neutral site stadium, which makes it a kickoff classic. That doesn't make it a bowl game. So you can call it all you want, but it's not going to – it won't mean a thing to me.
Yeah,
I won't care.
I don't know what that would provide. You know what I mean?
What it is it's people trying to find ways to make bowl games relevant again. And I'm sympathetic to that because I will say this, a August 31st bowl game, quote unquote bowl game between Clemson and LSU to kick off the season is going to be more impactful than a January 1st bowl game between Clemson and LSU who aren't in the playoffs. You're going to get the full team. So, I mean, I understand all that, but it doesn't make it a bowl game. You're just slapping a name on it. It doesn't make it the Rose Bowl. You see what I'm saying? Like,
totally.
Part of the Rose Bowl is not just that, but it's the pomp and circumstance. It's getting to go out to LA or out to California for a week, and you're not doing that going into week one. You're focused on, hey, we got the season to go. It's just it's a completely different environment. I would like to see the idea of kickoff classics coming back, where there's like 9-10 opening week, like neutral site or, games and of that'd be fine. Or maybe just 4 or 5. Like back in 89, there was a couple of those. There was like the kickoff classic and there was like the pigskin classic. And like 89, Notre Dame played in the kickoff classic in the Meadowlands against Virginia. I like that, but I just don't think that bowl games at the beginning of the season really mean it's still not going to mean any more. It doesn't make the Rose Bowl the Rose Bowl. And the other thing too is you're taking away an opportunity. For all these people say things don't matter, they matter to the players that play in them. For a lot of kids, that's their last chance to play football. It's their last chance to enjoy their team. It's all these things, and it's so disgusting and disrespectful that these games mean nothing to you, but it means something to them. Well, there's only 1,000 people in the stands. So I coached D3 football where we'd have 1,000 people in the stands. I can promise you those kids left everything they had on the football field every week, especially when it was their last chance to play. Just because you don't understand that doesn't mean the players don't. And, what about opt-outs? Then let those guys opt out. Those guys are opting out because they're about to go play football for another, hopefully, 5-10 years. For a lot of kids, this is it. This is their last chance to be together as a team. And we shouldn't take that away from them. That's a completely different thing than making a bowl game at the beginning of the season. And then who's eligible for those? What, based on last year's record? So then Florida State would have played in a bowl game this year? So I don't think that does anything. But I think I understand where Riker's coming from on what he's trying to find bowl games, make them relevant again. And that's totally fair. I totally get that. I just don't think this does that. I don't.
Fair enough.
So, Trevor, my man, that is going to do it for this week's Buy So Hold. Why don't you take us out of here?
You got it. Well, hey, guys, great submissions as always. Brian and I thoroughly enjoyed going through and answering some of those. A lot of good topics for discussion today. But listen, folks, before you head out of here, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever platform you watch us on, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Brian, I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.